Welcome to A Setting of Silver. This podcast exists to make historic Christian writings accessible to 21st century listeners. While not as valuable as the Bible, we can still learn much from the faith and practice of those who followed in the footsteps of the apostles. It's my hope that wherever you find yourself, these words, carried through time, would encourage you to walk in faith with Jesus. Lucius Caelius Firmianus Lactantius, better known just as Lactantius, was likely born sometime around AD 260 in North Africa. He was skilled in rhetoric and became a student of Arnobius, who himself taught in Sicca Veneria. Lactantius became so well known for his oratory skill that the Emperor Diocletian offered him a position in Nicomedia. Lactantius embraced Christianity and chose to resign his position before Diocletian's persecution. He lived in poverty until Constantine appointed Lactantius as tutor of his son around 315, and he died about 10 years later. This episode contains the last two works by this author presented here. In the first, a letter addressed to Donatus, Lactantius refutes the idea that God is an impassible, immutable being incapable of emotion or expressing anger or emotions, a concept which is rooted in philosophy rather than scripture. His argument largely mirrors those presented in the Divine Institutes, finding that man is evil and must follow the true religion, as revealed by Jesus, to be saved from punishment of one's sins. He again highlights the need for humans to live a pure life in order to escape the wrath of a holy and blameless God. As with the Divine Institutes, Lactantius's characterization of salvation appears to suggest that the degree to which we follow this true religion determines our eternal destiny. While this oversimplification is not consistent with the gospel, it is worth remembering that Lactantius primarily wrote to an audience versed in Greek and Roman literature. Just as Clement of Alexandria argued that Christianity was true philosophy, in one sense Lactantius is translating the Christian message into the language of the day by casting Christians as the true worshippers of a supreme deity. The second episode is entitled, On the Workmanship of God, addressed to Demetrianus. This collects some of Lactantius's thoughts on the nature of creation, how the human body is constructed, and how he finds the philosophers lacking with their understanding of humans. While some of the specifics that Lactantius focuses on could be charitably described as creative, his broader point is well worth remembering. That God has constructed every minute detail of our bodies in a way that brings him glory and is part of his greater design. Because of Lactantius's desire to evaluate the philosophers, and his extensive learning, this work also serves as a brief survey of medical knowledge at the time. As a result, it is impressive to see how much, and often how little, was known at the time. Additionally, some 1700 years later the interaction between the soul, mind, and body still remains quite a mystery. As a final note, there is a substantial portion of this work which is in Latin as it outlines Lactantius's understanding of sex, and the English editors apparently did not want to translate these sections. And now, please enjoy Lactantius's treatise on the anger of God addressed to Donatus.
I have often observed, Donatus, that many persons hold this opinion, which some philosophers also have maintained, that God is not subject to anger, since the divine nature is either altogether beneficent, and that it is inconsistent with his surpassing and excellent power to do injury to anyone, or, at any rate, he takes no notice of us at all, so that no advantage comes to us from his goodness, and no evil from his ill will. But the error of these men, because it is very great, and tends to overthrow the condition of human life, must be refuted by us, lest you yourself also should be deceived, being incited by the authority of men who deem themselves wise. Nor, however, are we so arrogant as to boast that the truth is comprehended by our intellect, but we follow the teaching of God, who alone is able to know and to reveal secret things. But the philosophers, being destitute of this teaching, have imagined that the nature of things can be ascertained by conjecture. But this is impossible, because the mind of man, enclosed in the dark abode of the body, is far removed from the perception of truth. And in this the divine nature differs from the human, that ignorance is the property of the human, knowledge of the divine nature. On which account we have need of some light to dispel the darkness by which the reflection of man is overspread, since, while we live in mortal flesh, we are unable to divine by our senses. But the light of the human mind is God, and he who has known and admitted him into his breast will acknowledge the mystery of the truth with an enlightened heart. But when God and heavenly instruction are removed, all things are full of errors. And Socrates, though he was the most learned of all the philosophers, yet, that he might prove the ignorance of the others, who thought that they possessed something, rightly said that he knew nothing, except one thing, that he knew nothing. For he understood that learning had nothing certain, nothing true in itself, nor, as some imagine, did he pretend to learning that he might refute others, but he saw the truth in some measure. And he testified even on his trial, as is related by Plato, that there was no human wisdom. He so despised, derided, and cast aside the learning in which the philosophers then boasted, that he professed that very thing as the greatest learning, that he had learnt that he knew nothing. If, therefore, there is no human wisdom, as Socrates taught, as Plato handed down, it is evident that the knowledge of the truth is divine, and belongs to no other than to God. Therefore God must be known, in whom alone is the truth. He is the parent of the world, and the framer of all things, who is not seen with the eyes, and is scarcely distinguished by the mind, whose religion is accustomed to be attacked in many ways by those who have neither been able to attain true wisdom, nor to comprehend the system of the great and heavenly secret. For since there are many steps by which the ascent is made to the abode of truth, it is not easy for anyone to reach the summit. For when the eyes are darkened by the brightness of the truth, they who are unable to maintain a firm step fall back to the level ground. Now the first step is to understand false religions, and to throw aside the impious worship of gods which are made by the hand of man. But the second step is to perceive with the mind that there is but one supreme God, whose power and providence made the world from the beginning, and afterwards continues to govern it. The third step is to know his servant and messenger, whom he sent as his ambassador to the earth, by whose teaching being freed from the error in which we were held entangled, and formed to the worship of the true God, we might learn righteousness. From all of these steps, as I have said, there is a rapid and easy gliding to a downfall, unless the feet are firmly planted with unshaken steadfastness. We see those shaken off from the first step, who, though they understand things which are false, do not, however, discover that which is true. And though they despised earthly and frail images, do not betake themselves to the worship of God, of whom they are ignorant. But viewing with admiration the elements of the universe, they worship the heaven, the earth, the sea, the sun, the moon, and the other heavenly bodies. But we have already reproved their ignorance in the second book of the Divine Institutes. But we say that those fall from the second step, who, though they understand that there is but one supreme God, nevertheless, ensnared by the philosophers, and captivated by false arguments, entertain opinions concerning that excellent majesty far removed from the truth, who either deny that God has any figure, or think that he is moved by no affection, because every affection is a sign of weakness, which has no existence in God. But they are precipitated from the third step, who, though they know the ambassador of God, who is also the builder of the divine and immortal temple, either do not receive him, or receive him otherwise than faith demands, whom we have partly refuted in the fourth book of the above-named work. And we will hereafter refute more carefully, when we shall begin to reply to all the sects, which, while they dispute, have destroyed the truth. But now we will argue against those who, falling from the second step, entertain wrong sentiments respecting the supreme God. For some say that he neither does a kindness to anyone, nor becomes angry, but in security and quietness enjoys the advantages of his own immortality. Others, indeed, take away anger, but leave to God kindness. For they think that a nature excelling in the greatest virtue, while it ought not to be malevolent, ought also to be benevolent. Thus all the philosophers are agreed on the subject of anger, but are at variance respecting kindness. But that my speech may descend in order to the proposed subject, a division of this kind must be made and followed by me, since anger and kindness are different, and opposed to one another. Either anger must be attributed to God, and kindness taken from him, or both alike must be taken from him, or anger must be taken away, and kindness attributed to him, or neither must be taken away. The nature of the case admits of nothing else besides these, so that the truth, which is sought for, must necessarily be found in some one of these. Let us consider them separately, that reason and arrangement may conduct us to the hiding place of truth. First, no one ever said this respecting God, that he is only subject to anger, and is not influenced by kindness. For it is unsuitable to God, that he should be endowed with a power of this kind, by which he may injure and do harm, but be unable to profit and to do good. What means, therefore, what hope of safety, is proposed to men, if God is the author of evils only? For if this is so, that venerable majesty will now be drawn out, not to the power of the judge, to whom it is permitted to preserve and set at liberty, but to the office of the torturer and executioner. But whereas we see that there are not only evils in human affairs, but also goods, it is plain that if God is the author of evils, there must be another who does things contrary to God, and gives to us good things. If there is such a one, by what name must he be called? Why is he who injures us more known to us than he who benefits us? But if this can be nothing besides God, it is absurd and vain to suppose that the divine power, than which nothing is greater or better, is able to injure, but unable to benefit. And accordingly no one has ever existed who ventured to assert this, because it is neither reasonable nor in any way credible. And because this is agreed upon, let us pass on and seek after the truth elsewhere. That which follows is concerning the school of Epicurus, that as there is no anger in God, so indeed there is no kindness. For when Epicurus thought that it was inconsistent with God to injure and to inflict harm, which for the most part arises from the affection of anger, he took away from him beneficence also, since he saw that it followed that if God has anger, he must also have kindness. Therefore, lest he should concede to him a vice, he deprived him also of virtue. From this, he says, he is happy and uncorrupted, because he cares about nothing, and neither takes trouble himself nor occasions it to another. Therefore he is not God, if he is neither moved, which is peculiar to a living being, nor does anything impossible for man, which is peculiar to God, if he has no will at all, no action, in short, no administration, which is worthy of God. And what greater, what more worthy administration can be attributed to God, than the government of the world, and especially of the human race, to which all earthly things are subject? What happiness, then, can there be in God, if he is always inactive, being at rest and unmovable? If he is deaf to those who pray to him, and blind to his worshippers? What is so worthy of God, and so befitting to him, as providence? But if he cares for nothing, and foresees nothing, he has lost all his divinity. What else does he say, who takes from God all power and all substance, except that there is no God at all? In short, Marcus Tullius relates that it was said by Posidonius, that Epicurus understood that there were no gods, but that he said those things which he spoke respecting the gods for the sake of driving away odium. And so that he leaves the gods in words, but takes them away in reality, since he gives them no motion, no office. But if this is so, what can be more deceitful than him? And this ought to be foreign to the character of a wise and weighty man. But if he understood one thing and spoke another, what else is he to be called than a deceiver, double-tongued, wicked, and moreover foolish? But Epicurus was not so crafty as to say those things with the desire of deceiving, when he consigned these things also by his writings to everlasting remembrance, but he erred through ignorance of the truth. For, being led from the beginning by the probability of a single opinion, he necessarily fell into those things which followed. For the first opinion was, that anger was not consistent with the character of God. And when this appeared to him to be true and unassailable, he was unable to refuse the consequences, because one affection being removed, necessity itself compelled him to remove from God the other affections also. Thus, he who is not subject to anger is plainly uninfluenced by kindness, which is the opposite feeling to anger. Now, if there is neither anger nor kindness in him, it is manifest that there is neither fear, nor joy, nor grief, nor pity. For all the affections have one system, one motion, which cannot be the case with God. But if there is no affection in God, because whatever is subject to affections is weak, it follows that there is in him neither the care of anything, nor providence. The disputation of the wise man extends thus far. He was silent as to the other things which follow, namely, that because there is in him neither care nor providence, therefore there is no reflection nor any perception in him, by which it is effected that he has no existence at all. Thus, when he had gradually descended, he remained on the last step, because he now saw the precipice. But what does it avail to have remained silent, and concealed the danger? Necessity compelled him even against his will to fall. For he said that which he did not mean, because he so arranged his argument that he necessarily came to that point which he wished to avoid. You see, therefore, to what point he comes, when anger is removed and taken away from God. In short, either no one believes that, or a very few, and they the guilty and the wicked, who hope for impunity for their sins. But if this also is found to be false, that there is neither anger nor kindness in God, let us come to that which is put in the third place. The Stoics and some others are supposed to have entertained much better sentiments respecting the divine nature, who say that there is kindness in God, but not anger. A very pleasing and popular speech, that God is not subject to such littleness of mind as to imagine that he is injured by any one, since it is impossible for him to be injured, so that serene and holy majesty is excited, disturbed, and maddened, which is the part of human frailty. For they say that anger is a commotion and perturbation of the mind, which is inconsistent with God. Since, when it falls upon the mind of anyone, as a violent tempest it excites such waves that it changes the condition of the mind, the eyes gleam, the countenance trembles, the tongue stammers, the teeth chatter. The countenance is alternately stained now with redness spread over it, now with white paleness. But if anger is unbecoming to a man, provided he be of wisdom and authority, how much more is so foul a change unbecoming to God? And if man, when he has authority and power, inflicts widespread injury through anger, sheds blood, overthrows cities, destroys communities, reduces provinces to desolation, how much more is it to be believed that God, since he has power over the whole human race, and over the universe itself, would have been about to destroy all things if he were angry. Therefore they think that so great and so pernicious an evil ought to be absent from him. And if anger and excitement are absent from him, because it is disfiguring and injurious, and he inflicts injury on no one, they think that nothing else remains, except that he is mild, calm, propitious, beneficent, the preserver. For thus at length he may be called the common father of all, and the best and greatest, which his divine and heavenly nature demands. For if among men it appears praiseworthy to do good rather than to injure, to restore to life rather than to kill, to save rather than to destroy, and innocence is not undeservedly numbered among the virtues, and he who does these things is loved, esteemed, honored, and celebrated with all blessings and vows, in short, on account of his deserts and benefits is judged to be most like to God, how much more right is it that God himself, who excels in divine and perfect virtues, and who is removed from all earthly taint, should conciliate the whole race of man by divine and heavenly benefits. Those things are spoken speciously and in a popular manner, and they allure many to believe them, but they who entertain these sentiments approach nearer indeed to the truth, but they partly fail, not sufficiently considering the nature of the case. For if God is not angry with the impious and the unrighteous, it is clear that he does not love the pious and the righteous. Therefore the error of those is more consistent who take away at once both anger and kindness. For in opposite matters it is necessary to be moved to both sides or to neither. Thus, he who loves the good also hates the wicked, and he who does not hate the wicked does not love the good. Because the loving of the good arises from the hatred of the wicked, and the hating of the wicked has its rise from the love of the good. There is no one who loves life without a hatred of death, nor who is desirous of light, but he who avoids darkness. These things are so connected by nature, that the one cannot exist without the other. If any master has in his household a good and a bad servant, it is evident that he does not hate them both, or confer upon both benefits and honors. For if he does this, he is both unjust and foolish. But he addresses the one who is good with friendly words, and honors him and sets him over his house and household, and all his affairs. But punishes the bad one with reproaches, with stripes, with nakedness, with hunger, with thirst, with fetters. So that the latter may be an example to others to keep them from sinning, and the former to conciliate them. So that fear may restrain some, and honor may excite others. He, therefore, who loves also hates, and he who hates also loves. For there are those who ought to be loved, and there are those who ought to be hated. And as he who loves confers good things on those whom he loves, so he who hates inflicts evils upon those whom he hates, which argument, because it is true, can in no way be refuted. Therefore the opinion of those is vain and false, who, when they attribute the one to God, take away the other, not less than the opinion of those who take away both. But the latter, as we have shown, in part do not err, but retain that which is the better of the two. Whereas the former, led on by the accurate method of their reasoning, fall into the greatest error, because they have assumed premises which are altogether false. For they ought not to have reasoned thus, because God is not liable to anger, therefore he is not moved by kindness. But in this manner, because God is moved by kindness, therefore he is also liable to anger. For if it had been certain and undoubted that God is not liable to anger, then the other point would necessarily be arrived at. But since the question as to whether God is angry is more open to doubt, while it is almost perfectly plain that he is kind, it is absurd to wish to subvert that which is certain by means of an uncertainty, since it is easier to confirm uncertain things by means of those which are certain. These are the opinions entertained by the philosophers respecting God. But if we have discovered that these things which have been spoken are false, there remains that one last resource, in which alone the truth can be found, which has never been embraced by philosophers, nor at any time defended. That it follows that God is angry, since he is moved by kindness. This opinion is to be maintained and asserted by us. For this is the sum and turning point on which the whole of piety and religion depend. And no honor can be due to God, if he affords nothing to his worshippers, and no fear, if he is not angry with him who does not worship him. The philosophers have often turned aside from reason through their ignorance of the truth, and have fallen into inextricable errors. For that is wont to happen to these which happens to a traveler ignorant of the way, and not confessing that he is ignorant, namely, that he wanders about, while he is ashamed to inquire from those whom he meets. No philosopher, however, has ever made the assertion that there is no difference between man and the brutes. Nor has any one at all, provided that he wished to appear wise, reduced a rational animal to the level of the mute and irrational, which some ignorant persons do, resembling the brutes themselves, who, wishing to give themselves up to the indulgence of their appetite and pleasure, say that they are born on the same principle as all living animals, which it is impious for man to say. For who is so unlearned as not to know, who is so void of understanding as not to perceive, that there is something divine in man? I do not as yet come to the excellences of the soul and of the intellect, by which there is a manifest affinity between man and God. Does not the position of the body itself, and the fashion of the countenance, declare that we are not on a level with the dumb creation? Their nature is prostrated to the ground and to their pasture, and has nothing in common with the heaven, which they do not look upon. But man, with his erect position, with his elevated countenance raised to the contemplation of the universe, compares his features with God, and reason recognizes reason. And on this account there is no animal, as Cicero says, except man, which has any knowledge of God. For he alone is furnished with wisdom, so that he alone understands religion. And this is the chief or only difference between man and the dumb animals. For the other things which appear to be peculiar to man, even if there are not such in the dumb animals, nevertheless may appear to be similar. Speech is peculiar to man, yet even in these there is a certain resemblance to speech. For they both distinguish one another by their voices, and when they are angry, they send forth a sound resembling altercation. And when they see one another after an interval of time, they show the office of congratulation by their voice. To us, indeed, their voices appear uncouth, as ours perhaps do to them, but to themselves, who understand one another, they are words. In short, in every affection they utter distinct expressions of voice by which they may show their state of mind. Laughter also is peculiar to man, and yet we see certain indications of joy in other animals, when they use passionate gestures with a view to sports, hang down their ears, contract their mouth, smooth their forehead, relax their eyes to sportiveness. What is so peculiar to man as reason and the foreseeing of the future? But there are animals which open several outlets in different directions from their lairs, that if any danger comes upon them, an escape may be open for them shut in. But they would not do this unless they possessed intelligence and reflection. Others are provident for the future, as ants, when they plunder a great heap of corn, mindful of the winter, and lay it up in their dwelling. Again, as bees, which alone know a country and fixed abodes, and mindful of the winter which is to come, they practice labor in the summer, and lay up their gains as a common stock. It would be a long task if I should wish to trace out the things most resembling the skill of man, which are accustomed to be done by the separate tribes of animals. But if, in the case of all these things which are wont to be ascribed to man, there is found to be some resemblance even in the dumb animals, it is evident that religion is the only thing of which no trace can be found in the dumb animals, nor any indication. For justice is peculiar to religion, and to this no other animal attains. For man alone bears rule, the other animals are subjected to him. But the worship of God is ascribed to justice, and he who does not embrace this, being far removed from the nature of man, will live the life of the brutes under the form of man. But since we differ from the other animals almost in this respect alone, that we alone of all perceive the divine might and power, while in the others there is no understanding of God, it is surely impossible that in this respect either the dumb animals should have more wisdom, or human nature should be unwise, since all living creatures, and the whole system of nature, are subject to man on account of his wisdom. Wherefore if the force of man in this respect, excels and surpasses the rest of living creatures, inasmuch as he alone is capable of the knowledge of God, it is evident that religion can in no way be overthrown. But religion is overthrown if we believe Epicurus speaking thus. For the nature of gods must ever in itself of necessity enjoy immortality together with supreme repose, far removed and withdrawn from our concerns. Since, exempt from every pain, exempt from all dangers, strong in its own resources, not wanting aught of us, it is neither gained by favors nor moved by anger. Now, when he says these things, does he think that any worship is to be paid to God, or does he entirely overthrow religion? For if God confers nothing good on anyone, if he repays the obedience of his worshipper with no favor, what is so senseless, what so foolish, as to build temples, to offer sacrifices, to present gifts, to diminish our property, that we may obtain nothing? But, it will be said, it is right that an excellent nature should be honored. What honor can be due to a being who pays no regard to us, and is ungrateful? Can we be bound in any manner to him who has nothing in common with us? Farewell to God, says Cicero, if he is such as to be influenced by no favor, and by no affection of men. For why should I say, may he be propitious? For he can be propitious to no one. What can be spoken more contemptible with respect to God? Farewell to him, he says, that is, let him depart and retire, since he is able to profit no one. But if God takes no trouble, nor occasions trouble to another, why then should we not commit crimes as often as it shall be in our power to escape the notice of men and to cheat the public laws? Wherever we shall obtain a favorable opportunity of escaping notice, let us take advantage of the occasion. Let us take away the property of others, either without bloodshed or even with blood, if there is nothing else besides the laws to be reverenced. While Epicurus entertains these sentiments, he altogether destroys religion, and when this is taken away, confusion and perturbation of life will follow. But if religion cannot be taken away without destroying our hold of wisdom, by which we are separated from the brutes, and of justice, by which the public life may be more secure, how can religion itself be maintained or guarded without fear? For that which is not feared is despised, and that which is despised is plainly not reverenced. Thus it comes to pass that religion, and majesty, and honor exist together with fear. But there is no fear where no one is angry. Whether, therefore, you take away from God kindness or anger, or both, religion must be taken away, without which the life of men is full of folly, of wickedness, and enormity. For conscience greatly curbs men, if we believe that we are living in the sight of God. If we imagine not only that the actions which we perform are seen from above, but also that our thoughts and our words are heard by God. But it is profitable to believe this, as some imagine, not for the sake of the truth, but of utility, since laws cannot punish conscience unless some terror from above hangs over to restrain offenses. Therefore religion is altogether false, and there is no divinity, but all things are made up by skillful men, in order that they may live more uprightly and innocently. This is a great question, and foreign to the subject which we have proposed, but because it necessarily occurs, it ought to be handled, however briefly. When the philosophers of former times had agreed in their opinions respecting providence, and there was no doubt but that the world was set in order by God and reason, and was governed by reason, Protagoras, in the times of Socrates, was the first of all who said that it was not clear to him whether there was any divinity or not. And this disputation of his was judged so impious, and so contrary to the truth and to religion, that the Athenians both banished him from their territories, and burnt in a public assembly those books of his in which these statements were contained. But there is no need to speak respecting his opinions, because he pronounced nothing certain. After these things Socrates and his disciple Plato, and those who flowed forth from the school of Plato like rivulets into different directions, namely, the Stoics and Peripatetics, were of the same opinion as those who went before them. Afterwards Epicurus said that there was indeed a God, because it was necessary that there should be in the world some being of surpassing excellence, distinction, and blessedness. Yet that there was no providence, and thus that the world itself was ordered by no plan, nor art, nor workmanship, but that the universe was made up of certain minute and indivisible seeds. But I do not see what can be said more repugnant to the truth. For if there is a God, as God he is manifestly provident. Nor can divinity be attributed to him in any other way than if he retains the past, and knows the present, and foresees the future. Therefore, in taking away providence, he also denied the existence of God. But when he openly acknowledged the existence of God, at the same time he also admitted his providence, for the one cannot exist at all, or be understood, without the other. But in those later times in which philosophy had now lost its vigor, there lived a certain Diagoras of Melos, who altogether denied the existence of God, and on account of this sentiment was called atheist. Also Theodorus of Cyrene. Both of whom, because they were unable to discover anything new, all things having already been said and found out, preferred even, in opposition to the truth, to deny that in which all preceding philosophers had agreed without any ambiguity. These are they who attacked providence, which had been asserted and defended through so many ages by so many intellects. What then? Shall we refute those trifling and inactive philosophers by reason, or by the authority of distinguished men, or rather by both? But we must hasten onwards, lest our speech should wander too far from our subject. They who do not admit that the world was made by divine providence, either say that it is composed of first principles coming together at random, or that it suddenly came into existence by nature, but hold, as Straton does, that nature has in itself the power of production and of diminution, but that it has neither sensibility nor figure, so that we may understand that all things were produced spontaneously, without any artificer or author. Each opinion is vain and impossible. But this happens to those who are ignorant of the truth, that they devise anything, rather than perceive that which the nature of the subject requires. First of all, with respect to those minute seeds, by the meeting together of which they say that the whole world came into existence, I ask where or whence they are. Who has seen them at any time? Who has perceived them? Who has heard them? Had none but Leucippus eyes? Had he alone a mind, who assuredly alone of all men was blind and senseless, since he spoke those things which no sick man could have uttered in his ravings, or one asleep in his dreams? The ancient philosophers argued that all things were made up of 4 elements. He would not admit this, lest he should appear to tread in the footsteps of others. But he held that there were other first principles of the elements themselves, which can neither be seen, nor touched, nor be perceived by any part of the body. They are so minute, he says, that there is no edge of a sword so fine that they can be cut and divided by it. From which circumstance he gave them the name of atoms. But it occurred to him, that if they all had one and the same nature, they could not make up different objects of so great a variety as we see to be present in the world. He said, therefore, that there were smooth and rough ones, and round, and angular, and hooked. How much better had it been to be silent, than to have a tongue for such miserable and empty uses? And, indeed, I fear lest he who thinks these things worthy of refutation, should appear no less to rave. Let us, however, reply as to one who says something. If they are soft and round, it is plain that they cannot lay hold of one another, so as to make some body. As, though anyone should wish to bind together millet into one combination, the very softness of the grains would not permit them to come together into a mass. If they are rough, and angular, and hooked, so that they may be able to cohere, then they are divisible, and capable of being cut. For hooks and angles must project, so that they may possibly be cut off. Therefore that which is able to be cut off and torn away, will be able both to be seen and held. These, he says, flutter about with restless motions through empty space, and are carried hither and thither, just as we see little particles of dust in the sun when it has introduced its rays and light through a window. From these there arise trees and herbs, and all fruits of the earth. From these, animals, and water, and fire, and all things are produced, and are again resolved into the same elements. This can be borne as long as the inquiry is respecting small matters. Even the world itself was made up of these. He has reached to the full extent of perfect madness. It seems impossible that anything further should be said, and yet he found something to add. Since everything, he says, is infinite, and nothing can be empty, it follows of necessity that there are innumerable worlds. What force of atoms had been so great, that masses so incalculable should be collected from such minute elements? And first of all I ask, what is the nature or origin of those seeds? For if all things are from them, whence shall we say that they themselves are? What nature supplied such an abundance of matter for the making of innumerable worlds? But let us grant that he raved with impunity concerning worlds. Let us speak respecting this in which we are, and which we see. He says that all things are made from minute bodies which are incapable of division. If this were so, no object would ever need the seed of its own kind. Birds would be born without eggs, or eggs without bringing forth. Likewise the rest of the living creatures without coition. Trees and the productions of the earth would not have their own seeds, which we daily handle and sow. Why does a cornfield arise from grain, and again grain from a cornfield? In short, if the meeting together and collecting of atoms would affect all things would grow together in the air, since atoms flutter about through empty space. Why cannot the herb, why cannot the tree or grain, arise or be increased without earth, without roots, without moisture, without seed? From which it is evident that nothing is made up from atoms, since everything has its own peculiar and fixed nature, its own seed, its own law given from the beginning. Finally, Lucretius, as though forgetful of atoms, which he was maintaining in order that he might refute those who say that all things are produced from nothing, employed these arguments, which might have weighed against himself. For he thus spoke: if things came from nothing, any kind might be born of anything, nothing would require seed. Likewise afterwards. We must admit, therefore, that nothing can come from nothing, since things require seed before they can severally be born, and be brought out into the buxom fields of air. Who would imagine that he had brain when he said these things, and did not see that they were contrary to one another? For that nothing is made by means of atoms is apparent from this, that everything has a definite seed, unless by chance we shall believe that the nature both of fire and water is derived from atoms. Why should I say, that if materials of the greatest hardness are struck together with a violent blow, fire is struck out? Are atoms concealed in the steel, or in the flint? Who shut them in? Or why do they not leap forth spontaneously? Or how could the seeds of fire remain in a material of the greatest coldness? I leave the subject of the flint and steel. If you hold in the sun an orb of crystal filled with water, fire is kindled from the light which is reflected from the water, even in the most severe cold. Must we then believe that fire is contained in the water? And yet fire cannot be kindled from the sun even in summer. If you shall breathe upon wax, or if a light vapor shall touch anything, either the hard surface of marble or a plate of metal, water is gradually condensed by means of the most minute drops. Also from the exhalation of the earth or sea mist is formed, which either, being dispersed, moistens whatever it has covered, or being collected, is carried aloft by the wind to high mountains, and compressed into cloud, and sends down great rains. Where, then, do we say that fluids are produced? Is it in the vapor? Or in the exhalation? Or in the wind? But nothing can be formed in that which is neither touched nor seen. Why should I speak of animals, in whose bodies we see nothing formed without plan, without arrangement, without utility, without beauty, so that the most skillful and careful marking out of all the parts and members repels the idea of accident and chance? But let us suppose it possible that the limbs, and bones, and nerves, and blood should be made up of atoms. What of the senses, the reflection, the memory, the mind, the natural capacity? From what seeds can they be compacted? He says, from the most minute. There are therefore others of greater size. How, then, are they indivisible? In the next place, if the things which are not seen are formed from invisible seeds, it follows that those which are seen are from visible seeds. Why, then, does no one see them? But whether anyone regards the invisible parts which are in man, or the parts which can be touched, and which are visible, who does not see that both parts exist in accordance with design? How, then, can bodies which meet together without design affect anything reasonable? For we see that there is nothing in the whole world which has not in itself very great and wonderful design. And since this is above the sense and capacity of man, to what can it be more rightly attributed than to the divine providence? If a statue, the resemblance of man, is made by the exercise of design and art, shall we suppose that man himself is made up of fragments which come together at random? And what resemblance to the truth is there in the thing produced, when the greatest and most surpassing skill can imitate nothing more than the mere outline and extreme lineaments of the body? Was the skill of man able to give to his production any motion or sensibility? I say nothing of the exercise of the sight, of hearing, and of smelling, and the wonderful uses of the other members, either those which are in sight or those which are hidden from view. What artificer could have fabricated either the heart of man, or the voice, or his very wisdom? Does any man of sound mind, therefore, think that that which man cannot do by reason and judgment, may be accomplished by a meeting together of atoms everywhere adhering to each other? You see into what foolish ravings they have fallen, while they are unwilling to assign to God the making and the care of all things. Let us, however, concede to them that the things which are earthly are made from atoms, are the things also which are heavenly. They say that the gods are without contamination, eternal, and blessed, and they grant to them alone an exemption, so that they do not appear to be made up of a meeting together of atoms. For if the gods also had been made up of these, they would be liable to be dispersed, the seeds at length being resolved, and returning to their own nature. Therefore, if there is something which the atoms could not produce, why may we not judge in the same way of the others? But I ask why the gods did not build for themselves a dwelling place before those first elements produced the world. It is manifest that, unless the atoms had come together and made the heaven, the gods would still be suspended through the midst of empty space. By what counsel, then, by what plan, did the atoms from a confused mass collect themselves, so that from some the earth below was formed into a globe, and the heaven stretched out above, adorned with so great a variety of constellations that nothing can be conceived more embellished? Can he, therefore, who sees such and so great objects, imagine that they were made without any design, without any providence, without any divine intelligence, but that such great and wonderful things arose out of fine and minute atoms? Does it not resemble a prodigy, that there should be any human being who might say these things, or that there should be those who might believe them, as Democritus, who was his hearer, or Epicurus, to whom all folly flowed forth from the fountain of Leucippus? But, as others say, the world was made by nature, which is without perception and figure. But this is much more absurd. If nature made the world, it must have made it by judgment and intelligence. For it is he that makes something who has either the inclination to make it, or knowledge. If nature is without perception and figure, how can that be made by it which has both perception and figure, unless by chance anyone thinks that the fabric of animals, which is so delicate, could have been formed and animated by that which is without perception, or that that figure of heaven, which is prepared with such foresight for the uses of living beings, suddenly came into existence by some accident or other, without a builder, without an artificer? If there is anything, says Chrysippus, which affects those things which man, though he is endowed with reason, cannot do, that assuredly is greater, and stronger, and wiser than man. But man cannot make heavenly things. Therefore that which shall produce or has produced these things surpasses man in art, in design, in skill, and in power. Who, therefore, can it be but God? But nature, which they suppose to be, as it were, the mother of all things, if it has not a mind, will effect nothing, will contrive nothing. For where there is no reflection there is neither motion nor efficacy. But if it uses counsel for the commencement of anything, reason for its arrangement, art for its accomplishment, energy for its consummation, and power to govern and control, why should it be called nature rather than God? Or if a concourse of atoms or nature without mind, made those things which we see, I ask why it was able to make the heaven, but unable to make a city or a house? Why it made mountains of marble, but did not make columns and statues? But ought not atoms to have come together to effect these things, since they leave no position untried? For concerning nature, which has no mind, it is no wonder that it forgot to do these things. What, then, is the case? It is plain that God, when he commenced this work of the world, than which nothing can be better arranged with respect to order, nor more befitting as to utility, nor more adorned as to beauty, nor greater as to bulk, himself made the things which could not be made by man. And among these also man himself, to whom he gave a portion of his own wisdom, and furnished him with reason, as much as earthly frailty was capable of receiving, that he might make for himself the things which were necessary for his own uses. But if in the commonwealth of this world, so to speak, there is no providence which rules, no God who administers, no sense at all prevails in this nature of things. From what source therefore will it be believed that the human mind, with its skill and its intelligence, had its origin? For if the body of man was made from the ground, from which circumstance man received his name, it follows that the soul, which has intelligence, and is the ruler of the body, which the limbs obey as a king and commander, which can neither be looked upon nor comprehended, could not have come to man except from a wise nature. But as mind and soul govern everybody, so also does God govern the world. For it is not probable that lesser and humble things bear rule, but that greater and highest things do not bear rule. In short, Marcus Cicero, in his Tusculan Disputations, and in his Consolation, says, "No origin of souls can be found on earth. For there is nothing," he says, "mixed and compound in souls, or which may appear to be produced and made up from the earth. Nothing moist or airy, or of the nature of fire. For in these natures there is nothing which has the force of memory, of mind and reflection, which both retains the past and foresees the future, and is able to comprise the present, which things alone are divine. For no source will ever be found from which they are able to come to man, unless it be from God. Since, therefore, with the exception of 2 or 3 vain calumniators, it is agreed upon that the world is governed by providence, as also it was made, and there is no one who ventures to prefer the opinion of Diagoras and Theodorus, or the empty fiction of Leucippus, or the levity of Democritus and Epicurus, either to the authority of those 7 ancient men who were called wise, or to that of Pythagoras or of Socrates or Plato, and the other philosophers who judged that there is a providence. Therefore that opinion also is false, by which they think that religion was instituted by wise men for the sake of terror and fear, in order that ignorant men might abstain from sins. But if this is true, it follows that we are derided by the wise men of old. But if they invented religion for the sake of deceiving us, and moreover of deceiving the whole human race, therefore they were not wise, because falsehood is not consistent with the character of the wise man. But grant that they were wise. What great success in falsehood was it, that they were able to deceive not only the unlearned, but Plato also, and Socrates, and so easily to delude Pythagoras, Zeno, and Aristotle, the chiefs of the greatest sects? There is therefore a divine providence, as those men whom I have named perceived, by the energy and power of which all things which we see were both made and are governed. For so vast a system of things, such arrangement and such regularity in preserving the settled orders and times, could neither at first have arisen without a provident artificer, or have existed so many ages without a powerful inhabitant, or have been perpetually governed without a skillful and intelligent ruler. And reason itself declares this. For whatever exists which has reason, must have arisen from reason. Now reason is the part of an intelligent and wise nature, but a wise and intelligent nature can be nothing else than God. Now the world, since it has reason, by which it is both governed and kept together, was therefore made by God. But if God is the maker and ruler of the world, then religion is rightly and truly established, for honor and worship are due to the author and common parent of all things. Since it is agreed upon concerning providence, it follows that we show whether it is to be believed that it belongs to many, or rather to one only. We have sufficiently taught, as I think, in our institutions, that there cannot be many gods, because, if the divine energy and power be distributed among several, it must necessarily be diminished. But that which is lessened is plainly mortal, but if he is not mortal, he can neither be lessened nor divided. Therefore there is but one God, in whom complete energy and power can neither be lessened nor increased. But if there are many, while they separately have something of power and authority, the sum itself decreases, nor will they separately be able to have the whole, which they have in common with others. So much will be wanting to each as the others shall possess. There cannot therefore be many rulers in this world, nor many masters in one house, nor many pilots in one ship, nor many leaders in one herd or flock, nor many queens in one swarm. But there could not have been many sons in heaven, as there are not several souls in one body. So entirely does the whole of nature agree in unity. But if the world is nourished by a soul, a spirit whose celestial flame glows in each member of the frame, and stirs the mighty whole, it is evident from the testimony of the poet, that there is one God who inhabits the world, since the whole body cannot be inhabited and governed except by one mind. Therefore all divine power must be in one person, by whose will and command all things are ruled. And therefore he is so great, that he cannot be described in words by man, or estimated by the senses. From what source, therefore, did the opinion or persuasion respecting many gods come to men? Without doubt, all those who are worshipped as gods were men, and were also the earliest and greatest kings. But who is ignorant that they were invested with divine honors after death, either on account of the virtue by which they had profited the race of men, or that they obtained immortal memory on account of the benefits and inventions by which they had adorned human life? And not only men, but women also. And this, both the most ancient writers of Greece, whom they call theologi, and also Roman writers following and imitating the Greeks, teach, of whom especially Euhemerus and Arrhenius, who point out the birthdays, marriages, offspring, governments, exploits, deaths, and tombs of all of them. And Tullius, following them, in his third book, On the Nature of the Gods, destroyed the public religions. But neither he himself nor any other person was able to introduce the true one, of which he was ignorant. And thus he himself testified that that which was false was evident, that the truth, however, lay concealed. Would to heaven, he says, that I could as easily discover true things as refute those that are false. And this he proclaimed not with dissimulation as an academic, but truly and in accordance with the feeling of his mind, because the truth cannot be uprooted from human perceptions. That which the foresight of man was able to attain to, he attained to, that he might expose false things. For whatever is fictitious and false, because it is supported by no reason, is easily destroyed. There is therefore one God, the source and origin of all things, as Plato both felt and taught in the Timaeus, whose majesty he declares to be so great, that it can neither be comprehended by the mind nor be expressed by the tongue. Hermes bears the same testimony, whom Cicero asserts to be reckoned by the Egyptians among the number of the gods. I speak of him who, on account of his excellence and knowledge of many arts, was called Trismegistus, and he was far more ancient not only than Plato, but than Pythagoras, and those 7 wise men. In Xenophon, Socrates, as he discourses, says that the form of God ought not to be inquired about. And Plato, in his Book of Laws, says, what God is, ought not to be the subject of inquiry, because it can neither be found out nor related. Pythagoras also admits that there is but one God, saying that there is an incorporeal mind, which, being diffused and stretched through all nature, gives vital perception to all living creatures. But Antisthenes, in his Physics, said that there was but one natural God, although the nations and cities have gods of their own people. Aristotle, with his followers the Peripatetics, and Zeno with his followers the Stoics, say nearly the same things. Truly it would be a long task to follow up the opinions of all separately, who, although they used different names, nevertheless agreed in one power which governed the world. But, however, though philosophers and poets, and those, in short, who worship the gods, often acknowledge the supreme God, yet no one ever inquired into, no one discussed, the subject of his worship and honors, with that persuasion, in truth, with which, always believing him to be bounteous and incorruptible, they think that he is neither angry with anyone, nor stands in need of any worship. Thus there can be no religion where there is no fear. Now, since we have replied to the impious and detestable wisdom, or rather senselessness of some, let us return to our proposed subject. We have said that, if religion is taken away, neither wisdom nor justice can be retained. Wisdom, because the understanding of the divine nature, in which we differ from the brutes, is found in man alone. Justice, because unless God, who cannot be deceived, shall restrain our desires, we shall live wickedly and impiously. Therefore, that our actions should be viewed by God, pertains not only to the usefulness of common life, but even to the truth, because, if religion and justice are taken away, having lost our reason, we either descend to the senselessness of the herds, or to the savageness of the beasts, yea, even more so, since the beasts spare animals of their own kind. What will be more savage, what more unmerciful, than man, if, the fear of a superior being taken away, he shall be able either to escape the notice of or to despise the might of the laws? It is therefore the fear of God alone which guards the mutual society of men, by which life itself is sustained, protected, and governed. But that fear is taken away if man is persuaded that God is without anger, for that he is moved and indignant when unjust actions are done. Not only the common advantage, but even reason itself, and truth, persuade us. We must again return to the former subjects, that, as we have taught that the world was made by God, we may teach why it was made. If anyone considers the whole government of the world, he will certainly understand how true is the opinion of the Stoics, who say that the world was made on our account. For all the things of which the world is composed, and which it produces from itself, are adapted to the use of man. Man, accordingly, uses fire for the purpose of warmth and light, and of softening his food, and for the working of iron. He uses springs for drinking and for baths. He uses rivers for irrigating the fields, and assigning boundaries to countries. He uses the earth for receiving a variety of fruits, the hills for planting vineyards, the mountains for the use of trees and firewood, the plains for crops of grain. He uses the sea not only for commerce, and for receiving supplies from distant countries, but also for abundance of every kind of fish. But if he makes use of these elements to which he is nearest, there is no doubt that he uses the heaven also, since the offices even of heavenly things are regulated for the fertility of the earth from which we live. The sun, with its ceaseless courses and unequal intervals, completes its annual circles, and either at his rising draws forth the day for labor, or at his setting brings on the night for repose. And at one time by his departure farther towards the south, at another time by his approach nearer towards the north, he causes the vicissitudes of winter and summer, so that both by the moistures and frosts of winter the earth becomes enriched for fruitfulness, and by the heats of summer either the produce of grass is hardened by maturity, or that which is in moist places, being seethed and heated, becomes ripened. The moon also, which governs the time of night, regulates her monthly courses by the alternate loss and recovery of light, and by the brightness of her shining illumines the nights obscure with gloomy darkness, so that journeys in the summer heat, and expeditions, and works, may be performed without labor and inconvenience, since by night the light stubble, by night the dry meadows are better mown. The other heavenly bodies also, either at their rising or setting, supply favorable times by their fixed positions. Moreover, they also afford guidance to ships, that they may not wander through the boundless deep with uncertain course, since the pilot duly observing them arrives at the harbor of the shore at which he aims. Clouds are attracted by the breath of the winds, that the fields of sown grain may be watered with showers, that the vines may abound with produce, and the trees with fruits. And these things are exhibited by a succession of changes throughout the year, that nothing may at any time be wanting by which the life of men is sustained. But, it is said, the same earth nourishes the other living creatures, and by the produce of the same even the dumb animals are fed. Has not God labored also for the sake of the dumb animals? By no means, because they are void of reason. On the contrary, we understand that even these themselves in the same manner were made by God for the use of man, partly for food, partly for clothing, partly to assist him in his work. So that it is manifest that the divine providence wished to furnish and adorn the life of men with an abundance of objects and resources, and on this account he both filled the air with birds, and the sea with fishes, and the earth with quadrupeds. But the academics, arguing against the Stoics, are accustomed to ask why, if God made all things for the sake of men, many things are found even opposed, and hostile, and injurious to us, as well in the sea as on the land. And the Stoics, without any regard to the truth, most foolishly repelled this. For they say that there are many things among natural productions, and reckoned among animals, the utility of which hitherto escapes notice, but that this is discovered in process of the times, as necessity and use have already discovered many things which were unknown in former ages. What utility, then, can be discovered in mice, in beetles, in serpents, which are troublesome and pernicious to man? Is it that some medicine lies concealed in them? If there is any, it will at some time be found out, namely, as a remedy against evils, whereas they complain that it is altogether evil. They say that the viper, when burnt and reduced to ashes, is a remedy for the bite of the same beast. How much better had it been that it should not exist at all, than that a remedy should be required against it drawn from itself? They might then have answered with more conciseness and truth after this manner. When God had formed man as it were his own image, that which was the completion of his workmanship, he breathed wisdom into him alone, so that he might bring all things into subjection to his own authority and government, and make use of all the advantages of the world. And yet he set before him both good and evil things, inasmuch as he gave to him wisdom, the whole nature of which is employed in discerning things evil and good. For no one can choose better things, and know what is good, unless he at the same time knows to reject and avoid the things which are evil. They are both mutually connected with each other, so that, the one being taken away, the other must also be taken away. Therefore, good and evil things being set before it, then at length wisdom discharges its office, and desires the good for usefulness, but rejects the evil for safety. Therefore, as innumerable good things have been given which it might enjoy, so also have evils, against which it might guard. For if there is no evil, no danger, nothing, in short, which can injure man, all the material of wisdom is taken away, and will be unnecessary for man. For if only good things are placed in sight, what need is there of reflection, of understanding, of knowledge, of reason? Since, wherever he shall extend his hand, that is befitting and adapted to nature, So that if anyone should wish to place a most exquisite dinner before infants, who as yet have no taste, it is plain that each will desire that to which either impulse, or hunger, or even accident, shall attract them. And whatever they shall take, it will be useful and salutary to them. What injury will it therefore be for them always to remain as they are, and always to be infants and unacquainted with affairs? But if you add a mixture either of bitter things, or things useless, or even poisonous, they are plainly deceived through their ignorance of good and evil, unless wisdom is added to them, by which they may have the rejection of evil things and the choice of good things. You see, therefore, that we have greater need of wisdom on account of evils, and unless these things had been proposed to us, we should not be a rational animal. But if this account is true, which the Stoics were in no manner able to see, that argument also of Epicurus is done away. God, he says, either wishes to take away evils, and is unable, or he is able, and is unwilling, or he is neither willing nor able, or he is both willing and able. If he is willing and is unable, he is feeble, which is not in accordance with the character of God. If he is able and unwilling, he is envious, which is equally at variance with God. If he is neither willing nor able, he is both envious and feeble, and therefore not God. If he is both willing and able, which alone is suitable to God, from what source then are evils? Or why does he not remove them? I know that many of the philosophers who defend providence are accustomed to be disturbed by this argument, and are almost driven against their will to admit that God takes no interest in anything, which Epicurus especially aims at. But having examined the matter, we easily do away with this formidable argument. For God is able to do whatever he wishes, and there is no weakness or envy in God. He is able, therefore, to take away evils, but he does not wish to do so, and yet he is not on that account envious. For on this account he does not take them away, because he at the same time gives wisdom, as I have shown. And there is more of goodness and pleasure in wisdom than of annoyance in evils. For wisdom causes us even to know God, and by that knowledge to attain to immortality, which is the chief good. Therefore, unless we first know evil, we shall be unable to know good. But Epicurus did not see this, nor did any other, that if evils are taken away, wisdom is in like manner taken away, and that no traces of virtue remain in man, the nature of which consists in enduring and overcoming the bitterness of evils. And thus, for the sake of a slight gain in the taking away of evils, we should be deprived of a good, which is very great, and true, and peculiar to us. It is plain, therefore, that all things are proposed for the sake of man, as well evils as also goods. It follows that I show for what purpose God made man himself. As he contrived the world for the sake of man, so he formed man himself on his own account, as it were a priest of a divine temple, a spectator of his works and of heavenly objects. For he is the only being who, since he is intelligent and capable of reason, is able to understand God, to admire his works, and perceive his energy and power, for on this account he is furnished with judgment, intelligence, and prudence. On this account he alone, beyond the other living creatures, has been made with an upright body and attitude, so that he seems to have been raised up for the contemplation of his parent. On this account he alone has received language, and a tongue the interpreter of his thought, that he may be able to declare the majesty of his Lord. Lastly, for this cause all things were placed under his control, that he himself might be under the control of God, their Maker and Creator. If God, therefore, designed man to be a worshipper of himself, and on this account gave him so much honor, that he might rule over all things, it is plainly most just that he should worship him who bestowed upon him such great gifts, and love man, who is united with us in the participation of the divine justice. For it is not right that a worshipper of God should be injured by a worshipper of God. From which it is understood that man was made for the sake of religion and justice. And of this matter Marcus Tullius is a witness in his books respecting the laws, since he thus speaks, "But of all things concerning which learned men dispute, nothing is of greater consequence than that it should be altogether understood that we are born to justice." And if this is most true, it follows that God will have all men to be just, that is, to have God and man as objects of their affection, to honor God in truth as a father, and to love man as a brother. For in these two things the whole of justice is comprised. But he who either fails to acknowledge God or acts injuriously to man, lives unjustly and contrary to his nature, and in this manner disturbs the divine institution and law. Here perhaps someone may ask, whence sins extended to man, Or what perversion distorted the rule of the divine institution to worse things, so that, though he was born to justice, he nevertheless performs unjust works. I have already in a former place explained, that God at the same time set before him good and evil, and that he loves the good, and hates the evil which is contrary to this. But that he permitted the evil on this account, that the good also might shine forth, since, as I have often taught, we understand that the one cannot exist without the other. In short, that the world itself is made up of two elements opposing and connected with one another, of fire and moisture, and that light could not have been made unless there has also been darkness, since there cannot be a higher place without a lower, nor a rising without a setting, nor warmth without cold, nor softness without hardness. Thus also we are composed of two substances equally opposed to one another, soul and body. The one of which is assigned to the heaven, because it is slight and not to be handled. The other to the earth, because it is capable of being laid hold of. The one is firm and eternal, the other frail and mortal. Therefore good clings to the one, and evil to the other. Light, life, and justice to the one. Darkness, death, and injustice to the other. Hence there arose among men the corruption of their nature, so that it was necessary that a law should be established, by which vices might be prohibited, and the duties of virtue be enjoined. Since, therefore, there are good and evil things in the affairs of men, the nature of which I have set forth, it must be that God is moved to both sides, both to favor when he sees that just things are done, and to anger when he perceives unjust things. But Epicurus opposes this, and says, if there is in God the affection of joy leading him to favor, and of hatred influencing him to anger, he must of necessity have both fear, and inclination, and desire, and the other affections which belong to human weakness. It does not follow that he who is angry must fear, or that he who feels joy must grieve. In short, they who are liable to anger are less timid, and they who are of a joyful temperament are less affected with grief. What need is there to speak of the affections of humanity, to which our nature yields? Let us weigh the divine necessity, for I am unwilling to speak of nature, since it is believed that our God was never born. The affection of fear has a subject matter in man, but it has none in God. Man, inasmuch as he is liable to many accidents and dangers, fears lest any greater violence should arise which may strike, despoil, lacerate, dash down, and destroy him. But God, who is liable neither to want, nor injury, nor pain, nor death, can by no means fear, because there is nothing which can offer violence to him. Also the reason and cause of desire is manifest in man. For, inasmuch as he was made frail and mortal, it was necessary that another and different sex should be made, by union with which offspring might be produced to continue the perpetuity of his race. But this desire has no place in God, because frailty and death are far removed from him. Nor is there with him any female in whose union he is able to rejoice. Nor does he stand in need of succession, since he will live forever. The same things may be said respecting envy and passion, to which, from sure and manifest causes, man is liable, but to which God is by no means liable. But, in truth, favor and anger and pity have their substance in God, and that greatest and matchless power employs them for the preservation of the world. Someone will ask what this substance is. First of all, when evils befall them, men in their dejected state for the most part have recourse to God. They appease and entreat him, believing that he is able to repel injuries from them. He has therefore an occasion of exercising pity, for he is not so unmerciful and a despiser of men as to refuse aid to those who are in distress. Very many, also, who are persuaded that justice is pleasing to God, both worship him who is Lord and parent of all, and with continual prayers and repeated vows offer gifts and sacrifices, follow up his name with praises, striving to gain his favor by just and good works. There is therefore a reason, on account of which God may and ought to favor them. For if there is nothing so befitting God as beneficence, and nothing so unsuited to his character as to be ungrateful, it is necessary that he should make some return for the services of those who are excellent, and who lead a holy life, that he may not be liable to the charge of ingratitude which is worthy of blame even in the case of a man. But, on the contrary, others are daring and wicked, who pollute all things with their lusts, harass with slaughters, practice fraud, plunder, commit perjury, neither spare relatives nor parents, neglect the laws, and even God himself. Anger, therefore, has a befitting occasion in God. For it is not right that, when he sees such things, he should not be moved, and arise to take vengeance upon the wicked, and destroy the pestilent and guilty, so as to promote the interests of all good men. Thus even in anger itself there is also contained a showing of kindness. Therefore the arguments are found to be empty and false, either of those who, when they will not admit that God is angry, will have it that he shows kindness, because this, indeed, cannot take place without anger, or of those who think that there is no emotion of the mind in God. And because there are some affections to which God is not liable, as desire, fear, avarice, grief, and envy, they have said that he is entirely free from all affection. For he is not liable to these, because they are vicious affections. But as to those which belong to virtue, that is, anger towards the wicked, regard towards the good, pity towards the afflicted, inasmuch as they are worthy of the divine power, he has affections of his own, both just and true. And if he is not possessed of them, the life of man will be thrown into confusion, and the condition of things will come to such disturbance that the laws will be despised and overpowered, and audacity alone reign, so that no one can at length be in safety unless he who excels in strength. Thus all the earth will be laid waste, as it were, by a common robbery. But now, since the wicked expect punishment, and the good hope for favor, and the afflicted look for aid, there is place for virtues, and crimes are more rare. But it is said, ofttimes the wicked are more prosperous, and the good more wretched, and the just are harassed with impunity by the unjust. We will hereafter consider why these things happen. In the meantime let us explain respecting anger, whether there be any in God, whether he takes no notice at all, and is unmoved at those things which are done with impiety. God, says Epicurus, regards nothing, therefore he has no power. For he who has power must of necessity regard affairs. For if he has power, and does not use it, what so great cause is there that, I will not say our race, but even the universe itself, should be contemptible in his sight? On this account he says he is pure and happy, because he is always at rest. To whom, then, has the administration of so great affairs been entrusted, if these things which we see to be governed by the highest judgment are neglected by God? Or how can he who lives and perceives be at rest? For rest belongs either to sleep or to death. But sleep has not rest. For when we are asleep, the body indeed is at rest, but the soul is restless and agitated. It forms for itself images which it may behold, so that it exercises its natural power of motion by a variety of visions, and calls itself away from false things, until the limbs are satiated, and receive vigor from rest. Therefore eternal rest belongs to death alone. Now if death does not affect God, it follows that God is never at rest. But in what can the action of God consist, but in the administration of the world? But if God carries on the care of the world, it follows that he cares for the life of men, and takes notice of the acts of individuals, and he earnestly desires that they should be wise and good. This is the will of God, this the divine law, and he who follows and observes this is beloved by God. It is necessary that he should be moved with anger against the man who has broken or despised this eternal and divine law. If, he says, God does harm to anyone, therefore he is not good. They are deceived by no slight error who defame all censure, whether human or divine, with the name of bitterness and malice, thinking that he ought to be called injurious who visits the injurious with punishment. But if this is so, it follows that we have injurious laws, which enact punishment for offenders, and injurious judges who inflict capital punishments on those convicted of crime. But if the law is just which awards to the transgressor his due, and if the judge is called upright and good when he punishes crimes, for he guards the safety of good men who punishes the evil, it follows that God, when he opposes the evil, is not injurious, but he himself is injurious who either injures an innocent man, or spares an injurious person that he may injure many. I would gladly ask from those who represent God as immovable, if anyone had property, a house, a household of slaves, and his slaves, despising the forbearance of their master, should attack all things, and themselves take the enjoyment of his goods, if his household should honor them, while the master was despised by all, insulted, and deserted. Could he be a wise man who should not avenge the insults, but permit those over whom he had power to have the enjoyment of his property? Can such forbearance be found in anyone? If, indeed, it is to be called forbearance, and not rather a kind of insensible stupor. But it is easy to endure contempt. What if those things were done which are spoken of by Cicero? For I ask, if any head of a family, when his children had been put to death by a slave, his wife slain and his house set on fire, should not exact most severe punishment from that slave, whether you would appear to be kind and merciful, or inhuman and most cruel. But if to pardon deeds of this kind is the part of cruelty rather than of kindness, it is not therefore the part of goodness in God not to be moved at those things which are done unjustly. For the world is, as it were, the house of God, and men, as it were, his slaves. And if his name is a mockery to them, what kinder amount of forbearance is it to give up his own honors, to see wicked and unjust things done, and not to be indignant, which is peculiar and natural to him who is displeased with sins. To be angry, therefore, is the part of reason, for thus faults are removed, and licentiousness is curbed. And this is plainly in accordance with justice and wisdom. But the Stoics did not see that there is a distinction between right and wrong, that there is a just and also an unjust anger. And because they did not find a remedy for the matter, they wished altogether to remove it. But the Peripatetics said that it was not to be cut out, but moderated, to whom we have made a sufficient reply in the 6th book of the Institutions. Now, that the philosophers were ignorant of the nature of anger, is plain from their definitions, which Seneca enumerated in the books which he composed on the subject of anger. Anger is, he says, the desire of avenging an injury. Others, as Posidonius says, describe it as the desire of punishing him by whom you think that you have been unfairly injured. Some have thus defined it. Anger is an incitement of the mind to injure him who either has committed an injury, or who has wished to do so. The definition of Aristotle does not differ greatly from ours, for he says that anger is the desire of requiting pain. This is the unjust anger, concerning which we spoke before, which is contained even in the dumb animals, but it is to be restrained in man, lest he should rush to some very great evil through rage. This cannot exist in God, because he cannot be injured, but it is found in man, inasmuch as he is frail. For the inflicting of injury inflames anguish, and anguish produces a desire of revenge. Where, then, is that just anger against offenders? For this is evidently not the desire of revenge, inasmuch as no injury proceeds. I do not speak of those who sin against the laws. For although a judge may be angry with these without incurring blame, let us, however, suppose that he ought to be of a sedate mind when he sentences the guilty to punishment, because he is the executor of the laws, not of his own spirit or power. For so they wish it who endeavor to extirpate anger. But I speak of those in particular who are in our own power, as slaves, children, wives, and pupils. For when we see these offend, we are incited to restrain them. For it cannot fail to be, that he who is just and good is displeased with things which are bad, and that he who is displeased with evil is moved when he sees it practiced. Therefore we arise to take vengeance, not because we have been injured, but that discipline may be preserved, morals may be corrected, and licentiousness be suppressed. This is just anger, and as it is necessary in man for the correction of wickedness, so manifestly is it necessary in God, from whom an example comes to man. For as we ought to restrain those who are subject to our power, so also ought God to restrain the offenses of all. And in order that he may do this, he must be angry, because it is natural for one who is good to be moved and incited at the fault of another. Therefore they ought to have given this definition. Anger is an emotion of the mind arousing itself for the restraining of faults. For the definition given by Cicero, anger is the desire of taking vengeance, does not differ much from those already mentioned. But that anger which we may call either fury or rage ought not to exist even in man, because it is altogether vicious. But the anger which relates to the correction of vices ought not to be taken away from man. Nor can it be taken away from God, because it is both serviceable for the affairs of men, and necessary. What need is there, they say, of anger, since faults can be corrected without this affection? But there is no one who can calmly see anyone committing an offense. This may perhaps be possible in him who presides over the laws, because the deed is not committed before his eyes, but it is brought before him as a doubtful matter from another quarter. Nor can any wickedness be so manifest, that there is no place for a defense, and therefore it is possible that a judge may not be moved against him who may possibly be found to be innocent. And when the detected crime shall have come to light, he now no longer uses his own opinion, but that of the laws. It may be granted that he does that which he does without anger, for he has that which he may follow. We, undoubtedly, when an offense is committed by our household at home, whether we see or perceive it, must be indignant, for the very sight of a sin is unbecoming. For he who is altogether unmoved either approves of faults, which is more disgraceful and unjust, or avoids the trouble of reproving them, which a tranquil spirit and a quiet mind despises and refuses, unless anger shall have aroused and incited it. But when anyone is moved, and yet through unseasonable leniency grants pardon more frequently than is necessary, or at all times, he evidently both destroys the life of those whose audacity he is fostering for greater crimes, and furnishes himself with a perpetual source of annoyances. Therefore the restraining of one's anger in the case of sins is faulty. Archytas of Tarentum is praised, who, when he had found everything ruined on his estate, rebuking the fault of his bailiff, said, "Wretch, I would have beaten you to death if I had not been angry." They consider this to be a singular example of forbearance, but influenced by authority, they do not see how foolishly he spoke and acted. For if, as Plato says, no prudent man punishes because there is an offense, but to prevent the occurrence of an offense, it is evident how evil an example this wise man put forth. For if slaves shall perceive that their master uses violence when he is not angry, and abstains from violence when he is angry, it is evident that they will not commit slight offenses, lest they should be beaten, but will commit the greatest offenses, that they may arouse the anger of the perverse man, and escape with impunity. But I should praise him if, when he was enraged, he had given space to his anger, that the excitement of his mind might calm down through the interval of time, and his chastisement might be confined within moderate limits. Therefore, on account of the magnitude of the anger, punishment ought not to have been inflicted, but to have been delayed, lest it should inflict upon the offender pain greater than is just, or occasion an outburst of fury in the punisher. But how is it equitable or wise, that anyone should be punished on account of a slight offense, and should be unpunished on account of a very great one? But if he had learned the nature and causes of things, he never would have professed so unsuitable a forbearance, that a wicked slave should rejoice that his master has been angry with him. For as God has furnished the human body with many and various senses which are necessary for the use of life, so also he has assigned to the soul various affections by which the course of life might be regulated. And as he has given desire for the sake of producing offspring, so has he given anger for the sake of restraining faults. But they who are ignorant of the ends of good and evil things, as they employ sensual desire for the purposes of corruption and pleasure, in the same manner make use of anger and passion for the inflicting of injury, while they are angry with those whom they regard with hatred. Therefore they are angry even with those who commit no offense, even with their equals or even with their superiors. Hence they daily rush to monstrous deeds, hence tragedies often arise. Therefore Archytas would be deserving of praise, if, when he had been enraged against any citizen or equal who injured him, he had curbed himself, and by forbearance mitigated the impetuosity of his fury. This self-restraint is glorious, by which any great evil which impends is restrained. But it is a fault not to check the faults of slaves and children, for through their escaping without punishment they will proceed to greater evil. In this case anger is not to be restrained, but even if it is in a state of inactivity, it must be aroused. But that which we say respecting man, we also say respecting God, who made man like to himself. I omit making mention of the figure of God, because the Stoics say that God has no form, and another great subject will arise if we should wish to refute them. I only speak respecting the soul. If it belongs to God to reflect, to be wise, to understand, to foresee, to excel, and of all animals man alone has these qualities, it follows that he was made after the likeness of God. But on this account he goes on to vice, because, being mingled with frailty derived from earth, he is unable to preserve pure and uncontaminated that which he has received from God, unless he is imbued with the precepts of justice by the same God. But since he is made up, as we have said, of two parts, soul and body, the virtues are contained in the one, and vices in the other, and they mutually oppose each other. For the good properties of the soul, which consist in restraining lusts, are contrary to the body, and the good properties of the body, which consist in every kind of pleasure, are hostile to the soul. But if the virtue of the soul shall have resisted the desires, and suppressed them, he will be truly like to God. From which it is evident that the soul of man, which is capable of divine virtue, is not mortal. But there is this distinction, that since virtue is attended with bitterness, and the attraction of pleasure is sweet, great numbers are overcome and are drawn aside to the pleasantness. But they who have given themselves up to the body and earthly things are pressed to the earth, and are unable to attain to the favor of the divine bounty, because they have polluted themselves with the defilements of vices. But they who, following God, and in obedience to him, have despised the desires of the body, and, preferring virtue to pleasures, have preserved innocence and righteousness, these God recognizes as like to himself. Since, therefore, he has laid down a most holy law, and wishes all men to be innocent and beneficent, is it possible that he should not be angry when he sees that his law is despised, that virtue is rejected, and pleasure made the object of pursuit? But if he is the governor of the world, as he might to be, he surely does not despise that which is even of the greatest importance in the whole world. If he has foresight, as it is befitting that God should have, it is plain that he consults the interests of the human race, in order that our life may be more abundantly supplied, and better and safer. If he is the Father and God of all, he is undoubtedly delighted with the virtues of men, and provoked by their vices. Therefore he loves the just, and hates the wicked. There is no need, one says, of hatred, for he once for all has fixed a reward for the good, and punishment for the wicked. But if anyone lives justly and innocently, and at the same time neither worships God nor has any regard for him, as Aristides, and Timon, and others of the philosophers, will he escape with impunity, because, though he has obeyed the law of God, he has nevertheless despised God himself? There is therefore something on account of which God may be angry with one rebelling against him, as it were, in reliance upon his integrity. If he can be angry with this man on account of his pride, why not more so with the sinner, who has despised the law together with the lawgiver? The judge cannot pardon offenses because he is subject to the will of another. But God can pardon, because he is himself the arbitrator and judge of his own law, and when he laid down this, he did not surely deprive himself of all power, but he has the liberty of bestowing pardon. If he is able to pardon, he is therefore able also to be angry. Why, then, someone will say, does it often occur, that they who sin are prosperous, and they who live piously are wretched? Because fugitives and disinherited persons live without restraint, and they who are under the discipline of a father or master live in a more strict and frugal manner. For virtue is proved and fixed by means of ills, vices by means of pleasure. Nor, however, ought he who sins to hope for lasting impunity, because there is no lasting happiness. But, in truth, the last day is always to be looked for by man, and no one ought to be called happy before his death and last funeral rites. As the not inelegant poet says, it is the end which proves happiness, and no one is able to escape the judgment of God, either when alive or after death. For he has the power both to cast down the living from on high, and to punish the dead with eternal torments. Nay, he says, if God is angry, he ought to have inflicted vengeance at once, and to have punished every one according to his desert. But, it is replied, if he had done this, no one would survive. For there is no one who offends in no respect, and there are many things which excite to the commission of sin: age, intemperance, want, opportunity, reward. To such an extent is the frailty of the flesh with which we are clothed liable to sin, that unless God were indulgent to this necessity, perhaps too few would live. On this account he is most patient, and restrains his anger. For because there is in him perfect virtue, it follows of necessity that his patience also is perfect, which is itself also a virtue. How many men, from having been sinners, have afterwards become righteous, from being injurious, have become good, from being wicked, have become temperate? How many who were in early life base, and condemned by the judgment of all, afterwards have turned out praiseworthy? But it is plain that this could not happen if punishment followed every offense. The public laws condemn those who are manifestly guilty, but there are great numbers whose offenses are concealed, great numbers who restrain the accuser either by entreaties or by reward, great numbers who elude justice by favor or influence. But if the divine censure should condemn all those who escape the punishment of men, there would be few or even no men on the earth. In short, even that one reason for destroying the human race might have been a just one, that men, despising the living God, pay divine honor to earthly and frail images, as though they were of heaven, adoring works made by human hands. And though God their Creator made them of elevated countenance and upright figure, and raised them to the contemplation of the heaven and the knowledge of God, they have preferred, like cattle, to bend themselves to the earth. For he is low and curved, and bent downward, who, turning away from the sight of heaven and God his Father, worships things of the earth, which he ought to have trodden upon, that is, things made and fashioned from earth. Therefore, amidst such great impiety and such great sins of men, the forbearance of God attains this object, that men, condemning the errors of their past life, correct themselves. In short, there are many who are just and good, and these, having laid aside the worship of earthly things, acknowledge the majesty of the one and only God. But though the forbearance of God is very great and most useful, yet, although late, he punishes the guilty, and does not suffer them to proceed further, when he sees that they are incorrigible. There remains one question, and that the last. For someone will perhaps say, that God is so far from being angry, that in his precepts he even forbids man to be angry. I might say that the anger of man ought to be curbed, because he is often angry unjustly, and he has immediate emotion, because he is only for a time. Therefore, lest those things should be done which the low, and those of moderate station, and great kings do in their anger, his rage ought to have been moderated and suppressed, lest, being out of his mind, he should commit some inexpiable crime. But God is not angry for a short time, because he is eternal and of perfect virtue, and he is never angry unless deservedly. But, however, the matter is not so, for if he should altogether prohibit anger, he himself would have been in some measure the censurer of his own workmanship, since he from the beginning had inserted anger in the liver of man, since it is believed that the cause of this emotion is contained in the moisture of the gall. Therefore he does not altogether prohibit anger, because that affection is necessarily given, but he forbids us to persevere in anger. For the anger of mortals ought to be mortal, for if it is lasting, enmity is strengthened to lasting destruction. Then, again, when he enjoined us to be angry, and yet not to sin, it is plain that he did not tear up anger by the roots, but restrained it, that in every correction we might preserve moderation and justice. Therefore he who commands us to be angry is manifestly himself angry. He who enjoins us to be quickly appeased is manifestly himself easy to be appeased. For he has enjoined those things which are just and useful for the interests of society. But because I had said that the anger of God is not for a time only, as is the case with man, who becomes inflamed with an immediate excitement, and on account of his frailty is unable easily to govern himself, we ought to understand that because God is eternal, his anger also remains to eternity. But, on the other hand, that because he is endued with the greatest excellence, he controls his anger, and is not ruled by it, but that he regulates it according to his will. And it is plain that this is not opposed to that which has just been said. For if his anger had been altogether immortal, there would be no place after a fault for satisfaction or kind feeling, though he himself commands men to be reconciled before the setting of the sun. But the divine anger remains forever against those who ever sin. Therefore God is appeased not by incense or a victim, not by costly offerings, which things are all corruptible, but by a reformation of the morals. And he who ceases to sin renders the anger of God mortal. For this reason he does not immediately punish everyone who is guilty, that man may have the opportunity of coming to a right mind, and correcting himself. This is what I had to say, most beloved Donatus, respecting the anger of God, that you might know how to refute those who represent God as being without emotions. It only remains that, after the practice of Cicero, I should use an epilogue by way of peroration. As he did in the Tusculan Disputations, when discoursing on the subject of death, so we in this work ought to bring forward divine testimonies, which may be believed, to refute the persuasion of those who, believing that God is without anger, destroy all religion, without which, as we have shown, we are either equal to the brutes in savageness, or to the cattle in foolishness. For it is in religion only, that is, in the knowledge of the supreme God, that wisdom consists. All the prophets being filled with the divine Spirit, speak nothing else than of the favor of God towards the righteous, and his anger against the ungodly. And their testimony is indeed sufficient for us, but because it is not believed by those who make a display of wisdom by their hair and dress, it was necessary to refute them by reason and arguments. For they act so preposterously, that human things give authority to divine things, whereas divine things ought rather to give authority to human. But let us now leave these things, lest we should produce no effect upon them, and the subject should be indefinitely drawn out. Let us therefore seek those testimonies which they can either believe, or at any rate not oppose. Authors of great number and weight have made mention of the Sibyls, of the Greeks, Aristo the Chian, and Apollodorus the Erythraean, of our writers, Varro and Fenestella. All these relate that the Erythraean Sibyl was distinguished and noble beyond the rest. Apollodorus, indeed, boasts of her as his own citizen and countrywoman. But Fenestella also relates that ambassadors were sent by the Senate to Erythrae, that the verses of this Sibyl might be conveyed to Rome, and that the consuls Curio and Octavius might take care that they should be placed in the capital, which had then been restored under the care of Quintus Catulus. In her writings, verses of this kind are found respecting the supreme God and Maker of the world. The incorruptible and eternal Maker who dwells in the heaven, holding forth good to the good, a much greater reward, but stirring up anger and rage against the evil and unjust. Again, in another place, enumerating the deeds by which God is especially moved to anger, she introduced these things. Avoid unlawful services and serve the living God. Abstain from adultery and impurity. Bring up a pure generation of children. Do not kill. For the immortal will be angry with everyone who may sin. Therefore he is angry with sinners. But because it is related by most learned men that there have been many Sibyls, the testimony of one may not be sufficient to confirm the truth, as we purpose to do. The volumes, indeed, of the Cumaean Sibyl, in which are written the fates of the Romans, are kept secret. But the writings of all the others are, for the most part, not prohibited from being in common use. And of these another, denouncing the anger of God against all nations on account of the impiety of men, thus began. Since great anger is coming upon a disobedient world, I disclose the commands of God to the last age, prophesying to all men from city to city. Another Sibyl also said, that the deluge was caused by the indignation of God against the unrighteous in a former age, that the wickedness of the human race might be extinguished. From the time when, the God of heaven being enraged against the cities themselves and all men, a deluge having burst forth, the sea covered the earth. In like manner she foretold a conflagration about to take place hereafter, in which the impiety of men should again be destroyed. And at some time, God no longer soothing his anger, but increasing it, and destroying the race of men, and laying waste the whole of it by fire. From which mention is thus made concerning Jupiter by Ovid. He remembers also that it is fated that the time shall come in which the sea, the earth, and the palace of heaven, being caught by fire, shall be burnt, and the curiously wrought framework of the world be in danger. And this must come to pass at the time when the honor and worship of the Supreme shall have perished among men. The same Sibyl, however, testifying that he was appeased by reformation of conduct and self-improvement, added these things. But, ye mortals, in pity turn yourselves now, and do not lead the great God to every kind of anger. And also a little later. He will not destroy, but will again restrain his anger, if you all practice valuable piety in your minds. Then another Sibyl declares that the Father of heavenly and earthly things ought to be loved, lest his indignation should arise, to the destruction of men. Lest by chance the immortal God should be angry, and destroy the whole race of men, their life and shameless race, it is befitting that we love the wise, ever-living God the Father. From these things it is evident that the arguments of the philosophers are vain, who imagine that God is without anger, and among his other praises reckon that which is most useless, detracting from him that which is most salutary for human affairs, by which majesty itself exists. For this earthly kingdom and government, unless guarded by fear, is broken down. Take away anger from a king, and he will not only cease to be obeyed, but he will even be cast down headlong from his height. Yea, rather take away this affection from any person of low degree, and who will not plunder him? Who will not deride him? Who will not treat him with injury? Thus he will be able to have neither clothing, nor an abode, nor food, since others will deprive him of whatever he has. Much less can we suppose that the majesty of the heavenly government can exist without anger and fear. The Milesian Apollo, being consulted concerning the religion of the Jews, inserted these things in his answer. God, the King and Father of all, before whom the earth trembles, and the heaven and sea, and whom the recesses of Tartarus and the demons dread. If he is so mild, as the philosophers will have it, how is it that not only the demons and ministers of such great power, but even the heaven and earth, and the whole system of the universe, tremble at his presence? For if no one submits to the service of another except by compulsion, it follows that all government exists by fear, and fear by anger. For if anyone is not aroused against one who is unwilling to obey, it will not be possible for him to be compelled to obedience. Let anyone consult his own feelings, he will at once understand that no one can be subdued to the command of another without anger and chastisement. Therefore, where there shall be no anger, there will be no authority. But God has authority, therefore also he must have anger, in which authority consists. Therefore let no one, induced by the empty prating of the philosophers, train himself to the contempt of God, which is the greatest impiety. We all are bound both to love him, because he is our Father, and to reverence him, because he is our Lord. Both to pay him honor, because he is bounteous, and to fear him, because he is severe. Each character in him is worthy of reverence. Who can preserve his piety, and yet fail to love the parent of his life? Or who can with impunity despise him who, as ruler of all things, has true and everlasting power over all? If you consider him in the character of Father, he supplies to us our entrance to the light which we enjoy. Through him we live, through him we have entered into the abode of this world. If you contemplate him as God, it is he who nourishes us with innumerable resources. It is he who sustains us. We dwell in his house, we are his household. And if we are less obedient than was befitting, and less attentive to our duty than the endless merits of our master and parent demanded, nevertheless it is of great avail to our obtaining pardon, if we retain the worship and knowledge of him. If, laying aside low and earthly affairs and goods, we meditate upon heavenly and divine things which are everlasting. And that we may be able to do this, God must be followed by us, God must be adored and loved. Since there is in him the substance of things, the principle of the virtues, and the source of all that is good. For what is greater in power than God, or more perfect in reason, or brighter in clearness? And since he begat us to wisdom, and produced us to righteousness, it is not allowable for man to forsake God, who is the giver of intelligence and life, and to serve earthly and frail things, or, intent upon seeking temporal goods, to turn aside from innocence and piety. Vicious and deadly pleasures do not render a man happy, nor does opulence, which is the inciter of lusts, nor empty ambition, nor frail honors, by which the human soul, being ensnared and enslaved to the body, is condemned to eternal death. But innocence and righteousness alone, the lawful and due reward of which is immortality, which God from the beginning appointed for holy and uncorrupted minds, which keep themselves pure and uncontaminated from vices, and from every earthly impurity. Of this heavenly and eternal reward they cannot be partakers, who have polluted their conscience by deeds of violence, frauds, rapine, and deceits, and who, by injuries inflicted upon men, by impious actions, have branded themselves with indelible stains. Accordingly it is befitting that all who wish deservedly to be called wise, who wish to be called men, should despise frail things, should trample upon earthly things, and should look down upon base things, that they may be able to be united in a most blissful relationship with God. Let impiety and discords be removed. Let turbulent and deadly dissensions be allayed, by which human societies and the divine union of the public league are broken in upon, divided, and dispersed. As far as we can, let us aim at being good and bounteous. If we have a supply of wealth and resources, let it not be devoted to the pleasure of a single person, but bestowed on the welfare of many. For pleasure is as short-lived as the body to which it does service. But justice and kindness are as immortal as the mind and soul, which by good works attain to the likeness of God. Let God be consecrated by us, not in temples, but in our heart. All things which are made by the hand are destructible. Let us cleanse this temple, which is defiled not by smoke or dust, but by evil thoughts, which is lighted not by blazing tapers but by the brightness and light of wisdom. And if we believe that God is always present in this temple, to whose divinity the secrets of the heart are open, we shall so live as always to have him propitious, and never to fear his anger.
And now, please enjoy Lactantius's On the Workmanship of God.
How disturbed I am, and in the greatest necessities, you will be able to judge from this little book which I have written to you, Demetrianus, almost in unadorned words, as the mediocrity of my talent permitted, that you might know my daily pursuit, and that I might not be wanting to you, even now an instructor, but of a more honorable subject and of a better system. For if you afforded yourself a ready hearer in literature, which did nothing else than form the style, how much more teachable ought you to be in these true studies, which have reference even to the life. And I now profess to you, that I am hindered by no necessity of circumstance or time from composing something by which the philosophers of our sect which we uphold may become better instructed and more learned for the future, although they now have a bad reputation, and are commonly reproved, as living otherwise than is befitting for wise men, and as concealing their vices under the covering of a name. Whereas they ought either to have remedied them, or to have altogether avoided them, that they might render the name of wisdom happy and uncorrupted, their life itself agreeing with their precepts. I, however, shrink from no labor that I may at once instruct ourselves and others. For I am not able to forget myself, and especially at that time when it is most necessary for me to remember. As also you do not forget yourself, as I hope and wish. For although the necessity of the state may turn you aside from true and just works, yet it is impossible that a mind conscious of rectitude should not from time to time look to the heaven. I indeed rejoice that all things which are esteemed blessings turn out prosperously to you, but only on condition of their changing nothing of your state of mind. For I fear lest custom and the pleasantness of these subjects should, as usually happens, creep by degrees into your mind. Therefore I advise you, and repeating it, will again and again advise you, not to believe that you have these enjoyments of the earth as great or true blessings, since they are not only deceitful because they are doubtful, but also treacherous because they are pleasant. For you know how crafty that wrestler and adversary of ours is, and also often violent, as we now see that he is. He employs all these things which are able to entice as snares, and with such subtlety that they escape the notice of the eyes of the mind, so that they cannot be avoided by the foresight of man. Therefore it is the highest prudence to advance step by step, since he occupies the passes on both sides, and secretly places stumbling blocks for our feet. Accordingly I advise you, either to disregard, if you are able according to your virtue, your prosperity in which you live, or not to admire it greatly. Remember your true parent, and in what city you have given your name, and of what rank you have been. You understand assuredly what I say. For I do not charge you with pride, of which there is not even a suspicion in your case. But the things which I say are to be referred to the mind, not to the body, the whole system of which has been arranged on this account, that it may be in subjection to the soul as to a master, and may be ruled by its will. For it is in a certain manner an earthen vessel in which the soul, that is, the true man himself, is contained, and that vessel indeed not made by Prometheus, as the poets say, but by that supreme creator and artificer of the world, God, whose divine providence and most perfect excellence it is neither possible to comprehend by the perception, nor to express in word. I will attempt, however, since mention has been made of the body and soul, to explain the nature of each, as far as the weakness of my understanding sees through. And I think that this duty is especially to be undertaken on this account, because Marcus Tullius, a man of remarkable talent, in his 4th book on the Republic, when he had attempted to do this, concluded a subject of wide extent within narrow limits, lightly selecting the chief points. And that there might be no excuse, because he had not followed up this subject, he testified that neither inclination nor attention had been wanting to him. For in his 1st book concerning the laws, when he was concisely summing up the same subject, he thus spoke: Scipio, as it appears to me, has sufficiently expressed this subject in those books which you have read. Afterwards, however, in his 2nd book concerning the nature of the gods, he endeavored to follow up the same subject more extensively. But since he did not express it sufficiently even there, I will approach this office, and will take upon myself boldly to explain that which a man of the greatest eloquence has almost left untouched. Perhaps you may blame me for attempting to discuss something in matters of obscurity, when you see that there have been men of such rashness who are commonly called philosophers, that they scrutinized those things which God willed to be abstruse and hidden, and investigated the nature of things in heaven and on earth, which are far removed from us, and cannot be examined by the eyes, nor touched by the hand, nor perceived by the senses. And yet they so dispute concerning the nature of these things, as to wish that the things which they bring forward may appear to be proved and known. What reason is there, I pray, why anyone should think it an invidious thing in us, if we wish to look into and contemplate the system of our body, which is not altogether obscure, because from the very offices of the limbs, and the uses of the several parts, it is permitted us to understand with what great power of providence each part has been made. For our Creator and Parent, God, has given to man perception and reason, that it might be evident from this that we are descended from him, because he himself is intelligence, he himself is perception and reason. Since he did not give that power of reason to the other animals, he provided beforehand in what manner their life might be more safe. For he clothed them all with their own natural hair, in order that they might more easily be able to endure the severity of frosts and colds. Moreover, he has appointed to every kind its own peculiar defense for the repelling of attacks from without, so that they may either oppose the stronger animals with natural weapons, or the feebler ones may withdraw themselves from danger by the swiftness of their flight, or those which require at once both strength and swiftness may protect themselves by craft, or guard themselves in hiding places. And so others of them either poise themselves aloft with light plumage, or are supported by hoofs, or are furnished with horns. Some have arms in their mouth, namely, their teeth, or hooked talons on their feet, and none of them is destitute of a defense for its own protection. But if any fall as a prey to the greater animals, that their race might not utterly perish, they have either been banished to that region where the greater ones cannot exist, or they have received a more abundant fruitfulness and production, that food might be supplied from them to the beasts which are nourished by blood, and yet their very multitude might survive the slaughter inflicted upon them, so as to preserve the race. But he made man, reason being granted to him, and the power of perceiving and speaking being given to him, destitute of those things which are given to the other animals, because wisdom was able to supply those things which the condition of nature had denied to him. He made him naked and defenseless, because he could be armed by his talent, and clothed by his reason. But it cannot be expressed how wonderfully the absence of those things which are given to the brutes contributes to the beauty of man. For if he had given to man the teeth of wild beasts, or horns, or claws, or hoofs, or a tail, or hairs of various color, who cannot perceive how misshapen an animal he would be, as the dumb animals, if they were made naked and defenseless. For if you take from these the natural clothing of their body, or those things by which they are armed of themselves, they can be neither beautiful nor safe, so that they appear wonderfully furnished if you think of utility, and wonderfully adorned if you think of appearance. In such a wonderful manner is utility combined with beauty. But with reference to man, whom he formed an eternal and immortal being, he did not arm him, as the others, without, but within, nor did he place his protection in the body, but in the soul. Since it would have been superfluous when he had given him that which was of the greatest value, to cover him with bodily defenses, especially when they hindered the beauty of the human body. On which account I am accustomed to wonder at the senselessness of the philosophers who follow Epicurus, who blame the works of nature, that they may show that the world is prepared and governed by no providence. But they ascribe the origin of all things to indivisible and solid bodies, from the fortuitous meetings of which they say that all things are and were produced. I pass by the things relating to the work itself with which they find fault, in which matter they are ridiculously mad. I assume that which belongs to the subject of which we are now treating. They complain that man is born in a more feeble and frail condition than that in which the other animals are born, for that these, as soon as they are produced from the womb, immediately raise themselves on their feet, and express their joy by running to and fro, and are at once fit for enduring the air, inasmuch as they have come forth to the light protected by natural coverings. But man, on the contrary, being naked and defenseless, is cast forth, and driven, as it were, from a shipwreck, to the miseries of this life. Who is neither able to move himself from the place where he has been born, nor to seek the nourishment of milk, nor to endure the injury of time. Therefore they say that nature is not the mother of the human race, but a stepmother, who has dealt so liberally with the dumb creation, but has so produced man, that, without resources, and without strength, and destitute of all aid, he can do nothing else than give tokens of the state of his frailty by wailing and lamentations. As well he may, whose destiny it is to go through in life so many ills. And when they say these things they are believed to be very wise, because everyone without consideration is displeased with his own condition. But I contend that they are never more foolish than when they say these things. For when I consider the condition of things, I understand that nothing ought to have been otherwise than it is, not to say could have been otherwise, for God is able to do all things. But it must be, that most provident majesty made that which was better and more right. I should like, therefore, to ask those censurers of the divine works, what they think to be wanting in man, on account of his being born in a more feeble condition. Do they think that men are, on this account, brought up worse? Or that they advance the less to the greatest strength of age? Or that weakness is a hindrance to their growth or safety, since reason bestows the things which are wanting? But, they say, the bringing up of man costs the greatest labors. In truth, the condition of the brute creation is better, because all these, when they have brought forth their young, have no care except for their own food, from which it is effected that, their teats being spontaneously distended, the nourishment of milk is supplied to their offspring, and that they seek this nourishment by the compulsion of nature, without any trouble on the part of the mothers. How is it with birds, which have a different nature? Do they not undergo the greatest labors in bringing up their young, so that they sometimes appear to have something of human intelligence? For they either build their nests of mud, or construct them with twigs and leaves, and they sit upon the eggs without taking food. And since it has not been given to them to nourish their young from their own bodies, they convey to them food, and spend whole days in going to and fro in this manner. But by night they defend, cherish, and protect them. What more can men do? Unless it be this only, that they do not drive away their young when grown up, but retain them bound by perpetual relationship and the bond of affection. Why should I say that the offspring of birds is much more fragile than that of man? Inasmuch as they do not bring forth the animal itself from the body of the mother, but that which, being warmed by the nourishment and heat of the body of the mother, produces the animal. And this, even when animated by breath, being unfledged and tender, is not only without the power of flying, but even of walking. Would he not, therefore, be most senseless, if anyone should think that nature has dealt badly with birds, first, because they are twice born, and then because they are so weak, that they have to be nourished by food sought with labor by their parents? But they select the stronger, and pass by the more feeble animals. I ask, therefore, from those who prefer the condition of the beasts to their own, what they would choose if God should give them the choice. Would they prefer the wisdom of man together with his weakness, or the strength of the beasts together with their nature? In truth, they are not so much like the beasts as not to prefer even a much more fragile condition, provided that it be human, to that strength of theirs unattended with reason. But, in truth, prudent men neither desire the reason of man together with frailty, nor the strength of the dumb animals without reason. Therefore it is nothing so repugnant or contradictory, that either reason or the condition of nature should of necessity prepare each animal. If it is furnished with natural protection, reason is superfluous. For what will it contrive? What will it do? Or what will it plan? Or in what will it display that light of the intellect, when nature of its own accord grants those things which are able to be the result of reason? But if it be endued with reason, what need will there be of defenses for the body, when reason once granted is able to supply the office of nature? And this has such power for the adorning and protection of man, that nothing greater or better can be given by God. Finally, since man is possessed of a body which is not great, and of slight strength, and of infirm health, nevertheless, since he has received that which is of greater value, he is better equipped than the other animals, and more adorned. For though he is born frail and feeble, yet he is safe from all the dumb animals, and all those which are born with greater strength, though they are able to bear patiently the inclemency of the sky, yet are unable to be safe from man. Thus it comes to pass that reason bestows more on man than nature does on the dumb animals, since, in their case, neither greatness of strength nor firmness of body can prevent them from being oppressed by us, or from being made subject to our power. Can anyone, then, when he sees that even elephants, with their vast bodies and strength, are subservient to man, complain respecting God, the maker of all things, because he has received moderate strength, and a small body, and not estimate according to their deserts the divine benefits towards himself, which is the part of an ungrateful man, or, to speak more truly, of a madman? Plato, I believe, that he might refute these ungrateful men, gave thanks to nature that he was born a man. How much better and more soundly did he act, who perceived that the condition of man was better, than they did who would have preferred that they had been born beasts. For if God should happen to change them into those animals whose condition they preferred to their own, they would now immediately desire to return to their previous state, and would with great outcries eagerly demand their former condition, because strength and firmness of body are not of such consequence that you should be without the office of the tongue, or the free course of birds through the air, that you should be without the hands. For the hands are of greater service than the lightness and use of the wings. The tongue is of greater service than the strength of the whole body. What madness is it, therefore, to prefer those things which, if they were given, you would refuse to receive? They also complain that man is liable to diseases, and to untimely death. They are indignant, it appears, that they are not born gods. By no means, they say, but we show from this, that man was made with no foresight, which ought to have been otherwise. What if I shall show, that this very thing was foreseen with great reason, that he might be able to be harassed by diseases, and that his life might often be cut short in the midst of its course? For, since God had known that the animal which he had made, of its own accord passed to death, that it might be capable of receiving death itself, which is the dissolution of nature, he gave to it frailty, which might find an approach for death in order to the dissolution of the animal. For if it had been of such strength that disease and sickness could not approach it, not even could death, since death is the consequence of diseases. But how could a premature death be absent from him, for whom a mature death had been appointed? Assuredly they wish that no man should die, unless when he has completed his 100th year. How can they maintain their consistency in so great an opposition of circumstances? For, in order that no one may be capable of dying before 100 years, something of the strength which is immortal must be given to him. And when this is granted, the condition of death must necessarily be excluded. But of what kind can that be, which can render a man firm and impregnable against diseases and attacks from without? For, inasmuch as he is composed of bones, and nerves, and flesh, and blood, which of these can be so firm as to repel frailty and death? That man, therefore, may not be liable to dissolution before that time which they think ought to have been appointed for him. Of what material will they assign to him a body? All things which can be seen and touched are frail. It remains that they seek something from heaven, since there is nothing on earth which is not weak. Since, therefore, man had to be so formed by God, that he should at some time be mortal, the matter itself required that he should be made with a frail and earthly body. It is necessary, therefore, that he should at some time receive death, since he is possessed of a body, for everybody is liable to dissolution and to death. Therefore they are most foolish who complain of premature death, since the condition of nature makes a place for it. Thus it will follow that he is subject also to diseases, for nature does not admit that infirmity can be absent from that body which is at some time to undergo dissolution. But let us suppose it to be possible, as they wish, that man is not born under those conditions by which he is subject to disease or death, unless, having completed the course of his life, he shall have arrived at the extremity of old age. They do not, therefore, see what would be the consequence if it were so arranged, that it would be plainly impossible to die at another time. But if anyone can be deprived of nourishment by another, it will be possible for him to die. Therefore the case requires that man, who cannot die before an appointed day, should have no need of the nourishment of food, because it may be taken from him. But if he shall have no need of food, he will now not be a man, but will become a god. Therefore, as I have already said, they who complain of the frailty of man, make this complaint especially, that they were not born immortal and everlasting. No one ought to die unless he is old. On this account, in truth, he ought to die, because he is not God. But mortality cannot be united with immortality. For if a man is mortal in old age, he cannot be immortal in youth. Neither is the condition of death foreign to him who is at some time about to die. Nor is there any immortality to which a limit is appointed. Thus it comes to pass, that the exclusion of immortality forever, and the reception of mortality for a time, place man in such a condition that he is at some time mortal. Therefore the necessity is in all points suitable, that he ought not to have been otherwise than he is, and that it was impossible. But they do not see the order of consequences, because they have once committed an error in the main point itself. For the divine providence having been excluded from the affairs of men, it necessarily followed that all things were produced of their own accord. Hence they invented the notion of those blows and fortuitous meetings together of minute seeds, because they did not see the origin of things. And when they had thrown themselves into this difficulty, necessity now compelled them to think that souls were born together with bodies, and in like manner were extinguished together with bodies. For they had made the assumption, that nothing was made by the divine mind. And they were unable to prove this in any other way, than by showing that there were some things in which the system of providence appeared to be at fault. Therefore they blamed those things in which providence wonderfully expressed its divinity, as those things which I have related concerning diseases and premature death. Whereas they ought to have considered, these things being assumed, what would be the necessary consequences. But those things which I have spoken are the consequences, if he were not liable to diseases, and did not require a dwelling, nor clothing. For why should he fear the winds, or rains, or colds, the power of which consists in this, that they bring diseases? For on this account he has received wisdom, that he may guard his frailty against things that would injure him. The necessary consequence is, that since he is liable to diseases for the sake of retaining his wisdom, he must also be liable to death. Because he to whom death does not come, must of necessity be firm. But infirmity has in itself the condition of death. But where there shall be firmness, neither can old age have any place, nor death, which follows old age. Moreover, if death were appointed for a fixed age, man would become most arrogant, and would be destitute of all humanity. For almost all the rights of humanity, by which we are united with one another, arise from fear and the consciousness of frailty. In short, all the more feeble and timid animals herd together, that, since they are unable to protect themselves by strength, they may protect themselves by their multitude. But the stronger animals seek solitudes, since they trust in their force and strength. If man also, in the same manner, had sufficient strength for the repelling of dangers, and did not stand in need of the assistance of any other, what society would there be? Or what system? What humanity? Or what would be more harsh than man? What more brutal? What more savage? But since he is feeble, and not able to live by himself apart from man, he desires society, that his life, passed in intercourse with others, may become both more adorned and more safe. You see, therefore, that the whole reason of man centers most of all in this, that he is born naked and fragile, that he is attacked by diseases, that he is punished by premature death. And if these things should be taken away from man, reason also, and wisdom, must necessarily be taken away. But I am discussing too long respecting things which are manifest, since it is clear that nothing ever was made, or could have been made, without providence. And if I should now wish to discuss respecting all its works in order, the subject would be infinite. But I have purposed to speak so much concerning the body of man only, that I may show in it the power of divine providence, how great it has been in those things only which are easy of comprehension and open. For those things which relate to the soul can neither be subjected to the eyes, nor comprehended. Now we speak concerning the vessel itself of man, which we see. In the beginning, when God was forming the animals, he did not wish to conglobate and collect them into a round shape, that they might be able easily to put themselves in motion for walking, and to turn themselves in any direction. But from the highest part of the body he lengthened out the head. He also carried out to a greater length some of the limbs, which are called feet, that, being fixed on the ground with alternate motions, they might lead forward the animal wherever his inclination had borne him, or the necessity of seeking food had called him. Moreover, he made 4 limbs standing out from the very vessel of the body. 2 behind, which are in all animals, the feet. Also 2 close to the head and neck, which supply various uses to animals. For in cattle and wild beasts they are feet like the hinder ones. But in man they are hands, which are produced not for walking, but for acting and controlling. There is also a third class, in which those former limbs are neither feet nor hands, but wings, which, having feathers arranged in order, supply the use of flying. Thus one formation has different forms and uses, and that he might firmly hold together the density itself of the body, by binding together greater and small bones, he compacted a kind of keel, which we call the spine, and he did not think fit to form it of one continued bone, lest the animal should not have the power of walking and bending itself. From its middle part, as it were, he has extended in a different direction transverse and flat bones, by which, being slightly curved, and almost drawn together to themselves as into a circle, the inward organs may be covered, that those parts which needed to be soft and less strong might be protected by the encircling of a solid framework. But at the end of that joining together which we have said to resemble the keel of a ship, he placed the head, in which might be the government of the whole living creature. And this name was given to it, as indeed Varro writes to Cicero, because from this the senses and the nerves take their beginning. But those parts which we have said to be lengthened out from the body, either for the sake of walking, or of acting, or of flying, he would have to consist of bones, neither too long, for the sake of rapidity of motion, nor too short, for the sake of firmness, but of a few, and those large. For either they are 2 as in man, or 4 as in a quadruped. And these he did not make solid, lest in walking sluggishness and weight should retard, but he made them hollow, and full of marrow within, to preserve the vigor of the body. And again, he did not make them equally extended to the end, but he conglobated their extremities with coarse knots, that they might be able more easily to be bound with sinews, and to be turned more easily, from which they are called joints. These knots he made firmly solid, and covered with a soft kind of covering, which is called cartilage, for this purpose, that they might be bent without galling or any sense of pain. He did not, however, form these after one fashion, for he made some simple and round into an orb, in those joints at least in which it was befitting that the limbs should move in all directions, as in the shoulders, since it is necessary that the hands should move and be twisted about in any direction. But others he made broad, and equal, and round towards one part, and that plainly in those places where only it was necessary for the limbs to be bent, as in the knees, and in the elbows, and in the hands themselves. For as it was at the same time pleasant to the sight, and useful, that the hands should move in every direction from that position from which they spring, so assuredly, if this same thing should happen to the elbows, a motion of that kind would be at once superfluous and unbecoming. For then the hand, having lost the dignity which it now has, through its excessive flexibility, would appear like the trunk of an elephant. And man would be altogether snake-handed, an instance of which has been wonderfully effected in that monstrous beast. For God, who wished to display his providence and power by a wonderful variety of many things, inasmuch as he had not extended the head of that animal to such a length that he might be able to touch the earth with his mouth, which would have been horrible and hideous, and because he had so armed the mouth itself with extended tusks, that even if he touched the earth the tusks would still deprive him of the power of feeding, he lengthened out between these from the top of the forehead a soft and flexible limb, by which he might be able to grasp and lay hold of anything, lest the prominent magnitude of the tusks, or the shortness of the neck, should interfere with the arrangement for taking food. I cannot here be prevented from again showing the folly of Epicurus. For all the ravings of Lucretius belong to him, who, in order that he might show that animals are not produced by any contrivance of the divine mind, but, as he is wont to say, by chance, said that in the beginning of the world innumerable other animals of wonderful form and magnitude were produced, but that they were unable to be permanent, because either the power of taking food, or the method of uniting and generating, had failed them. It is evident that, in order to make a place for his atoms flying about through the boundless and empty space, he wished to exclude the divine providence. But when he saw that a wonderful system of providence is contained in all things which breathe, what vanity was it, O mischievous one, to say that there had been animals of immense size, in which the system of production ceased. Since, therefore, all things which we see are produced with reference to a plan, for nothing but a plan can effect this very condition of being born, it is manifest that nothing could have been born without a plan. For it was previously foreseen in the formation of everything, how it should use the service of the limbs for the necessaries of life, and how the offspring, being produced from the union of bodies, might preserve all living creatures by their several species. For if a skillful architect, when he designs to construct some great building, first of all considers what will be the effect of the complete building, and previously ascertains by measurement what situation is suitable for a light weight, in what place a massive part of the structure will stand, what will be the intervals between the columns, what or where will be the descents and outlets of the falling waters and the reservoirs, he first, I say, foresees these things, that he may begin together with the very foundations whatever things are necessary for the work when now completed. Why should anyone suppose that, in the contrivance of animals, God did not foresee what things were necessary for living, before giving life itself? For it is manifest that life could not exist, unless those things by which it exists were previously arranged. Therefore Epicurus saw in the bodies of animals the skill of a divine plan. But that he might carry into effect that which he had before imprudently assumed, he added another absurdity agreeing with the former. For he said that the eyes were not produced for seeing, nor the ears for hearing, nor the feet for walking, since these members were produced before there was the exercise of seeing, hearing, and walking, but that all the offices of these members arose from them after their production. I fear lest the refutation of such extravagant and ridiculous stories should appear to be no less foolish, but it pleases me to be foolish, since we are dealing with a foolish man, lest he should think himself too clever. What do you say, Epicurus? Were not the eyes produced for seeing? Why, then, do they see? Their use, he says, afterward showed itself. Therefore they were produced for the sake of seeing, since they can do nothing else but see. Likewise, in the case of the other limbs, use itself shows for what purpose they were produced. For it is plain that this use could have no existence, unless all the limbs had been made with such arrangement and foresight, that they might be able to have their use. For what if you should say, that birds were not made to fly, nor wild beasts to rage, nor fishes to swim, nor men to be wise, when it is evident that living creatures are subject to that natural disposition and office to which each was created? But it is evident that he who has lost the main point itself of the truth must always be in error. For if all things are produced not by providence, but by a fortuitous meeting together of atoms, why does it never happen by chance, that those first principles meet together in such a way as to make an animal of such a kind, that it might rather hear with its nostrils, smell with its eyes, and see with its ears? For if the first principles leave no kind of position untried, monstrous productions of this kind ought daily to have been brought forth, in which the arrangement of the limbs might be distorted, and the use far different from that which prevails. But since all the races of animals, and all the limbs, observe their own laws and arrangements, and the uses assigned to them, it is plain that nothing is made by chance, since a perpetual arrangement of the divine plan is preserved. But we will refute Epicurus at another time. Now let us discuss the subject of providence, as we have begun. God therefore connected and bound together the parts which strengthen the body, which we call bones, being knotted and joined to one another by sinews, which the mind might make use of, as bands, if it should wish to hasten forward or to lag behind. And, indeed, without any labor or effort, but with a very slight inclination, it might moderate and guide the mass of the whole body. But he covered these with the inward organs, as was befitting to each place, that the parts which were solid might be enclosed and concealed. Also he mixed with the inward organs, veins as streams divided through the whole body, through which the moisture and the blood, running in different directions, might bedew all the limbs with the vital juices. And he fashioned these inward organs after that manner which was befitting to each kind and situation, and covered them with skin drawn over them, which he either adorned with beauty only, or covered with thick hair, or fenced with scales, or adorned with brilliant feathers. But that is a wonderful contrivance of God, that one arrangement and one state exhibits innumerable varieties of animals. For in almost all things which breathe there is the same connection and arrangement of the limbs. For first of all is the head, and annexed to this the neck, also the breast adjoined to the neck, and the shoulders projecting from it, the belly adhering to the breast, also the organs of generation subjoined to the belly, in the last place, the thighs and feet. Nor do the limbs only keep their own course and position in all, but also the parts of the limbs. For in the head itself alone the ears occupy a fixed position, the eyes a fixed position, likewise the nostrils, the mouth also, and in the teeth and tongue. And though all these things are the same in all animals, yet there is an infinite and manifold diversity of the things formed. Because those things of which I have spoken, being either more drawn out or more contracted, are comprehended by lineaments differing in various ways. What, is not that divine, that in so great a multitude of living creatures each animal is most excellent in its own class and species? So that if any part should be taken from one to another, the necessary result would be, that nothing would be more embarrassed for use, nothing more unshapely to look upon. As if you should give a prolonged neck to an elephant, or a short neck to a camel. Or if you should attach feet or hair to serpents, in which the length of the body equally stretched out required nothing else, except that being marked as to their backs with spots, and supporting themselves by their smooth scales, with winding courses they should glide into slippery tracts. But in quadrupeds the same designer lengthened out the arrangement of the spine, which is drawn out from the top of the head to a greater length on the outside of the body, and pointed it into a tail, that the parts of the body which are offensive might either be covered on account of their unsightliness, or be protected on account of their tenderness, so that by its motion certain minute and injurious animals might be driven away from the body. And if you should take away this member, the animal would be imperfect and weak. But where there is reason in the hand, that is not so necessary as a covering of hair. To such an extent are all things most befittingly arranged, each in its own class, that nothing can be conceived more unbecoming than a quadruped which is naked, or a man that is covered. But, however, though nakedness itself on the part of man tends in a wonderful manner to beauty, yet it was not adapted to his head, for what great deformity there would be in this, is evident from baldness. Therefore he clothed the head with hair, and because it was about to be on the top, he added it as an ornament, as it were, to the highest summit of the building. And this ornament is not collected into a circle, or rounded into the figure of a cap, lest it should be unsightly by leaving some parts bare. But it is freely poured forth in some places, and withdrawn in others, according to the comeliness of each place. Therefore, the forehead entrenched by a circumference, and the hair put forth from the temples before the ears, and the uppermost parts of these being surrounded after the manner of a crown, and all the back part of the head covered, display an appearance of wonderful comeliness. Then the nature of the beard contributes in an incredible degree to distinguish the maturity of bodies, or to the distinction of sex, or to the beauty of manliness and strength. so that it appears that the system of the whole work would not have been in agreement, if anything had been made otherwise than it is. Now I will show the plan of the whole man, and will explain the uses and habits of the several members which are exposed to view in the body, or concealed. When, therefore, God had determined of all the animals to make man alone heavenly, and all the rest earthly, he raised him erect to the contemplation of the heaven, and made him a biped, doubtless that he might look to the same quarter from which he derives his origin. But he depressed the others to the earth, that, inasmuch as they have no expectation of immortality, being cast down with their whole body to the ground, they might be subservient to their appetite and food. And thus the right reason and elevated position of man alone, and his countenance, shared with and closely resembling God his Father, bespeak his origin and maker. His mind, nearly divine, because it has obtained the rule not only over the animals which are on the earth, but even over his own body, being situated in the highest part, the head, as in a lofty citadel, looks out upon and observes all things. He formed this its palace not drawn out and extended, as in the case of the dumb animals, but like an orb and a globe, because all roundness belongs to a perfect plan and figure. Therefore the mind and that divine fire is covered with it, as with a vault. And when he had covered its highest top with a natural garment, he alike furnished and adorned the front part which is called the face, with the necessary services of the members. And first, he closed the orbs of the eyes with concave apertures, from which boring Varro thought that the forehead derived its name. And he would have these to be neither less nor more than 2. Because no number is more perfect as to appearance than that of 2. As also he made the ears 2, the doubleness of which bears with it an incredible degree of beauty, both because each part is adorned with a resemblance, and that voices coming from both sides may more easily be collected. For the form itself is fashioned after a wonderful manner, because he would not have their apertures to be naked and uncovered, which would have been less becoming and less useful, since the voice might fly beyond the narrow space of simple caverns, and be scattered, did not the apertures themselves confine it, received through hollow windings and kept back from reverberation, like those small vessels, by the application of which narrow-mouthed vessels are accustomed to be filled. These ears, then, which have their name from the drinking in of voices, from which Virgil says, "And with these ears I drank in his voice." Or because the Greeks call the voice itself odon, from hearing, the ears, ars, were named as though odds by the change of a letter. God would not form of soft skins, which, hanging down and flaccid, might take away beauty, nor of hard and solid bones, lest, being stiff and immovable, they should be inconvenient for use. But he designed that which might be between these, that a softer cartilage might bind them, and that they might have at once a befitting and flexible firmness. In these the office of bearing only is placed, as that of seeing is in the eyes, the acuteness of which is especially inexplicable and wonderful. For he covered their orbs, presenting the similitude of gems in that part with which they had to see, with transparent membranes, that the images of objects placed opposite them, being refracted as in a mirror, might penetrate to the innermost perception. Through these membranes, therefore, that faculty which is called the mind sees those things which are without, lest you should happen to think that we see either by the striking of the images, as the philosophers discuss, since the office of seeing ought to be in that which sees, not in that which is seen, or in the tension of the air together with the eyesight, or in the outpouring of the rays. Since, if it were so, we should see the ray towards which we turn with our eyes, until the air, being extended together with the eyesight, or the rays being poured out, should arrive at the object which was to be seen. But since we see at the same moment of time, and for the most part, while engaged on other business, we nevertheless behold all things which are placed opposite to us, it is more true and evident that it is the mind which, through the eyes, sees those things which are placed opposite to it, as though through windows covered with pellucid crystal or transparent stone. And therefore the mind and inclination are often known from the eyes. For the refutation of which Lucretius employed a very senseless argument. For if the mind, he says, sees through the eye, it would see better if the eyes were torn out and dug up, inasmuch as doors being torn up together with the doorposts let in more light than if they were covered. Truly his eyes, or rather those of Epicurus who taught him, ought to have been dug out, that they might not see, that the torn out orbs, and the burst fibers of the eyes, and the blood flowing through the veins, and the flesh increasing from wounds, and the scars drawn over at last can admit no light, unless by chance he would have it that eyes are produced resembling ears, so that we should see not so much with eyes as with apertures, than which there can be nothing more unsightly or more useless. For how little should we be able to see, if from the innermost recesses of the head the mind should pay attention through slight fissures of caverns? As, if anyone should wish to look through a stalk of hemlock, he would see no more than the capability of the stalk itself admitted. For sight, therefore, it was rather needful that the members should be collected together into an orb, that the sight might be spread in breadth and the parts which adjoined them in the front of the face, that they might freely behold all things. Therefore the unspeakable power of the divine providence made two orbs most resembling each other, and so bound them together that they might be able not only to be altogether turned, but to be moved and directed with moderation. And he willed that the orbs themselves should be full of a pure and clear moisture, in the middle part of which sparks of lights might be kept shut up, which we call the pupils, in which, being pure and delicate, are contained the faculty and method of seeing. The mind therefore directs itself through these orbs that it may see, and the sight of both the eyes is mingled and joined together in a wonderful manner. It pleases me in this place to censure the folly of those who, while they wish to show that the senses are false, collect many instances in which the eyes are deceived. And among them this also, that all things appear double to the mad and intoxicated, as though the cause of that error were obscure. For it happens on this account, because there are two eyes. But hear how it happens. The sight of the eyes consists in the exertion of the soul. Therefore, since the mind, as has been above said, uses the eyes as windows, this happens not only to those who are intoxicated or mad, but even to those who are of sound mind, and sober. For if you place any object too near, it will appear double, for there is a certain interval in space in which the sight of the eyes meets together. Likewise, if you call the soul back as if to reflection, and relax the exertion of the mind, then the sight of each eye is drawn asunder, and they each begin to see separately. If you, again, exert the mind and direct the eyesight, whatever appeared double unites into one. What wonder, therefore, if the mind, impaired by poison and the powerful influence of wine, cannot direct itself to seeing, as the feet cannot to walking when they are weak through the numbness of the sinews, or if the force of madness raging against the brain disunites the agreement of the eyes? Which is so true, that in the case of one-eyed men, if they become either mad or intoxicated, it can by no means happen that they see any object double. Wherefore, if the reason is evident why the eyes are deceived, it is clear that the senses are not false. For they either are not deceived if they are pure and sound, or if they are deceived, yet the mind is not deceived which recognizes their error. But let us return to the works of God. That the eyes, therefore, might be better protected from injury, he concealed them with the coverings of the eyelashes, from which Varro thinks that the eyes derive their name. For even the eyelids themselves, in which there is the power of rapid motion, and to which throbbing gives their name, being protected by hairs standing in order, afford a most becoming fence to the eyes, the continual motion of which, meeting with incomprehensible rapidity, does not impede the course of the sight, and relieves the eyes. For the pupil, that is, the transparent membrane, which ought not to be drained and to become dry, unless it is cleansed by continual moisture so that it shines clearly, loses its power. Why should I speak of the summits of the eyebrows themselves, furnished with short hair? Do they not, as it were by mounds, both afford protection to the eyes, so that nothing may fall into them from above, and at the same time ornament? And the nose, arising from the confines of these, and stretched out, as it were, with an equal ridge, at once serves to separate and to protect the two eyes. Below also, a not unbecoming swelling of the cheeks, gently rising after the similitude of hills, makes the eyes safer on every side. And it has been provided by the great artificer, that if there shall happen to be a more violent blow, it may be repelled by the projecting parts. But the upper part of the nose as far as the middle has been made solid, but the lower part has been made with a softened cartilage annexed to it, that it may be pliant to the use of the fingers. Moreover, in this, though a single member, 3 offices are placed. 1, that of drawing the breath, the 2nd, that of smelling, the 3rd, that the secretions of the brain may escape through its caverns. And in how wonderful, how divine a manner did God contrive these also, so that the very cavity of the nose should not deform the beauty of the face, which would certainly have been the case if one single aperture only were open. But he enclosed and divided that, as though by a wall drawn through the middle, and made it most beautiful by the very circumstance of its being double. From which we understand of how much weight the twofold number, made firm by one simple connection, is to the perfection of things. For though the body is one, yet the whole could not be made up of single members, unless it were that there should be parts on the right hand or on the left. Therefore, as the 2 feet and also hands not only availed to some utility and practice either of walking or of doing something, but also bestow an admirable character and comeliness, so in the head, which is, as it were, the crown of the divine work, the hearing has been divided by the great artificer into 2 ears, and the sight into 2 eyes, and the smelling into 2 nostrils, because the brain, in which is contained the system of the sensation, although it is one, yet is divided into 2 parts by the intervening membrane. But the heart also, which appears to be the abode of wisdom, although it is one, yet has 2 recesses within, in which are contained the living fountains of blood, divided by an intervening barrier. That as in the world itself the chief control, being twofold from simple matter, or simple from a twofold matter, governs and keeps together the whole. So in the body, all the parts, being constructed of 2, might present an inseparable unity. Also how useful and how becoming is the appearance and the opening of the mouth transversely cannot be expressed, the use of which consists in 2 offices, that of taking food and speaking. The tongue enclosed within, which by its motions divides the voice into words, and is the interpreter of the mind, cannot, however, by itself alone fulfill the office of speaking, unless it strikes its edge against the palate, unless aided by striking against the teeth or by the compression of the lips. The teeth, however, contribute more to speaking, for infants do not begin to speak before they have teeth, and old men, when they have lost their teeth, so lisp that they appear to have returned afresh to infancy. But these things relate to man alone, or to birds, in which the tongue, being pointed and vibrating with fixed motions, expresses innumerable inflections of songs and various kinds of sounds. It has, moreover, another office also which it exercises in all, and this alone in the dumb animals, that it collects the food when bruised and ground by the teeth, and by its force presses it down when collected into balls, and transmits it to the belly. Accordingly, Varro thinks that the name of tongue was given to it from binding the food. It also assists the beasts in drinking, for with the tongue stretched out and hollowed they draw water, and when they have taken it in the hollow of the tongue, lest by slowness and delay it should flow away, they dash it against the palate with swift rapidity. This, therefore, is covered by the concave part of the palate as by a shell, and God has surrounded it with the enclosure of the teeth as with a wall. But he has adorned the teeth themselves, which are arranged in order in a wonderful manner, lest, being bare and exposed, they should be a terror rather than an ornament, with soft gums, which are so named from producing teeth, and then with the coverings of the lips. And the hardness of the teeth, as in a millstone, is greater and rougher than in the other bones, that they might be sufficient for bruising the food and pasture. But how befittingly has he divided the lips themselves, which as it were before were united. The upper of which, under the very middle of the nostrils, he has marked with a kind of slight cavity, as with a valley. He has gracefully spread out the lower for the sake of beauty. For, as far as relates to the receiving of flavor, he is deceived, whoever he is, who thinks that this sense resides in the palate. For it is the tongue by which flavors are perceived, and not the whole of it. For the parts of it which are more tender on either side, draw in the flavor with the most delicate perceptions. And though nothing is diminished from that which is eaten or drunk, yet the flavor in an indescribable manner penetrates to the sense, in the same way in which the taking of the smell detracts nothing from any material. And how beautiful the other parts are can scarcely be expressed. The chin, gently drawn down from the cheeks, and the lower part of it so closed that the lightly imprinted division appears to mark its extreme point. The neck stiff and well-rounded. The shoulders let down as though by gentle ridges from the neck. The forearms powerful, and braced by sinews for firmness. The great strength of the upper arms standing out with remarkable muscles. The useful and becoming bending of the elbows. What shall I say of the hands, the ministers of reason and wisdom? Which the most skillful creator made with a flat and moderately concave bend, that if anything was to be held, it might conveniently rest upon them, and terminated them in the fingers, in which it is difficult to explain whether the appearance or the usefulness is greater. For the perfection and completeness of their number, and the comeliness of their order and gradation, and the flexible bending of the equal joints, and the round form of the nails, comprising and strengthening the tips of the fingers with concave coverings, lest the softness of the flesh should yield in holding any object, afford great adornment. But this is convenient for use, in wonderful ways, that one separated from the rest rises together with the hand itself, and is enlarged in a different direction, which, offering itself as though to meet the others, possesses all the power of holding and doing either alone, or in a special manner, as the guide and director of them all, from which also it received the name of thumb, because it prevails among the others by force and power. It has 2 joints standing out, not as the others, 3. But one is annexed by flesh to the hand for the sake of beauty. For if it had been with 3 joints, and itself separate, the foul and unbecoming appearance would have deprived the hand of all grace. Again, the breadth of the breast, being elevated, and exposed to the eyes, displays a wonderful dignity of its condition, of which this is the cause, that God appears to have made man only, as it were, reclining with his face upward. For scarcely any other animal is able to lie upon its back. But he appears to have formed the dumb animals as though lying on one side, and to have pressed them to the earth. For this reason he gave them a narrow breast, and removed from sight, and prostrate towards the earth. But he made that of man open and erect, because, being full of reason given from heaven, it was not befitting that it should be humble or unbecoming. The nipples also gently rising, and crowned with darker and small orbs, add something of beauty, being given to females for the nourishment of their young, to males for grace only, that the breast might not appear misshapen, and, as it were, mutilated. Below this is placed the fiat surface of the belly, about the middle of which the navel distinguishes by a not unbecoming mark, being made for this purpose, that through it the young, while it is in the womb, may be nourished. It necessarily follows that I should begin to speak of the inward parts also, to which has been assigned not beauty, because they are concealed from view, but incredible utility, since it was necessary that this earthly body should be nourished with some moisture from food and drink, as the earth itself is by showers and frosts. The most provident artificer placed in the middle of it a receptacle for articles of food, by means of which, when digested and liquefied, it might distribute the vital juices to all the members. But since man is composed of body and soul, that receptacle of which I have spoken above affords nourishment only to the body. To the soul, in truth, he has given another abode. For he has made a kind of intestines soft and thin, which we call the lungs, into which the breath might pass by an alternate interchange. And he did not form this after the fashion of the uterus, lest the breath should all at once be poured forth, or at once inflated. And on this account he did not make it a full intestine, but capable of being inflated, and admitting the air, so that it might gradually receive the breath, while the vital air is spread through that thinness, and might again gradually give it back, while it spreads itself forth from it. For the very alternation of blowing and breathing, and the process of respiration, support life in the body. Since, therefore, there are in man 2 receptacles, one of the air which nourishes the soul, the other of the food which nourishes the body, there must be 2 tubes through the neck for food, and for breath, the upper of which leads from the mouth to the belly, the lower from the nostrils to the lungs. And the plan and nature of these are different, for the passage which is from the mouth has been made soft, and which when closed always adheres to itself, as the month itself, since drink and food, being corporeal, make for themselves a space for passage, by moving aside and opening the gullet. The breath, on the other hand, which is incorporeal and thin, because it was unable to make for itself a space, has received an open way, which is called the windpipe. This is composed of flexible and soft bones, as though of rings fitted together after the manner of a hemlock stalk, and adhering together, and this passage is always open. For the breath can have no cessation in passing, because it, which is always passing to and fro, is checked as by a kind of obstacle through means of a portion of a member usefully sent down from the brain, and which is called the uvula, lest, drawn by pestilential air, it should come with impetuosity and spoil the lightness of its abode, or bring the whole violence of the injury upon the inner receptacles. And on this account also the nostrils are slightly open, which are therefore so named, because either smell or breath does not cease to flow through these, which are, as it were, the doors of this tube. Yet this breathing tube lies open not only to the nostrils, but also to the mouth in the extreme regions of the palate, where the risings of the jaws, looking towards the uvula, begin to raise themselves into a swelling. And the reason of this arrangement is not obscure, for we should not have the power of speaking if the windpipe were open to the nostrils only, as the path of the gullet is to the mouth only. Nor could the breath proceeding from it cause the voice, without the service of the tongue. Therefore the divine skill opened a way for the voice from that breathing tube, so that the tongue might be able to discharge its office, and by its strokes divide into words the even course of the voice itself. And this passage, if by any means it is intercepted, must necessarily cause dumbness. For he is assuredly mistaken, whoever thinks that there is any other cause why men are dumb. For they are not tongue-tied, as is commonly believed, but they pour forth that vocal breath through the nostrils, as though bellowing, because there is either no passage at all for the voice to the mouth, or it is not so open as to be able to send forth the full voice. And this generally comes to pass by nature. Sometimes also it happens by accident that this entrance is blocked up and does not transmit the voice to the tongue, and thus makes those who can speak dumb. And when this happens, the hearing also must necessarily be blocked up, so that because it cannot emit the voice, it is also incapable of admitting it. Therefore this passage has been opened for the purpose of speaking. It also affords this advantage that in frequenting the bath, because the nostrils are not able to endure the heat, the hot air is taken in by the mouth. Also, if phlegm contracted by cold shall have happened to stop up the breathing pores of the nostrils, we may be able to draw the air through the mouth, lest, if the passage should be obstructed, the breath should be stifled. But the food being received into the stomach, and mixed with the moisture of the drink, when it has now been digested by the heat, its juice, being in an indescribable manner diffused through the limbs, bedews and invigorates the whole body. The manifold coils also of the intestines, and their length rolled together on themselves, and yet fastened with one band, are a wonderful work of God. For when the stomach has sent forth from itself the food softened, it is gradually thrust forth through those windings of the intestines, so that whatever of the moisture by which the body is nourished is in them, is divided to all the members. And yet, lest in any place it should happen to adhere and remain fixed, which might have taken place on account of the turnings of the coils, which often turn back to themselves, and which could not have happened without injury, he has spread over these from within a thicker juice, that the secretions of the belly might more easily work their way through the slippery substance to their outlets. It is also a most skillful arrangement that the bladder, which birds do not use, though it is separated from the intestines, and has no tube by which it may draw the urine from them, is nevertheless filled and distended with moisture. And it is not difficult to see how this comes to pass. For the parts of the intestines which receive the food and drink from the belly are more open than the other coils, and much more delicate. These entwine themselves around and encompass the bladder, and when the meat and the drink have arrived at these parts in a mixed state, the excrement becomes more solid, and passes through, but all the moisture is strained through those tender parts, and the bladder, the membrane of which is equally fine and delicate, absorbs and collects it, so as to send it forth where nature has opened an outlet. De utero quoque et conception, quoniam de internis locimor, dici necess est, ne quid praeteris vidmer, quae quamquam in operto latent, sensum tamen equi intelligentium later non passant. Vena in maribus, quae seminium continet, duplex est, paulo interior, quam illid humoris obscani receptaculum. Sicut enim renes duo sunt, itemquid testes, ida et venes seminellis due, in una tamen compage cohi rons, quod vitamus incorporibus animalium, cum interfecta patefiunt. Sed illa dexterior masculinum continet semen, sinisterior fomininum, et omnino in toto corpori pars dextra masculina est, sinistra vito feminina. Ipsum semen quidem putant ex medullis tantum, quidem ex omni corpori ad venum genitalum confluere, ebique concrescere. Sed hoc, humana mens, quomodo fiat, non potest comprehendir. Item in fominis uterus in duas se dividit partes, quae in diversum diffusi ac reflexe, circumplicantur, sicut arietis cornua. Quae pars in dextrum retorquator, masculina est, quae in sinistrum, feminina. Conceptum igator Varro et Aristoteles sic fieri arbitrantur. Iend non tantum maribus annes semen, verum etiam fominis, et inde plerumque matribus similis procreri, sed iram semen sanguinum esse purgatum, quod si rect cum virili mixture sit, utrac concreta et simul coagulata informari. Et primum quidem cor hominis effini, quod in eo sit et vita omnis et sapientia. Denictotum opus quadragesimo die consumari. Ex abortion ibus hae si fortas collecta sunt. In avium tamen fidibus primern oculis fingi dubium non est. quod in ovis se pe deprehendimus. Und fieri non posse arbitror quin fictio ad capit sumat exordium. Similitudinis autem in corporibus filiorum sic fieri putant. Cum semina inter se permixta coalescunt, si viral superaverant, patri similum provenir. Seu merum. Seu fominum. Si muliebre prevaluerant. Progenium cujusque sexus ad imaginem respondir maternum. Id autem prevalei duobus, quod furit uberius. Alterum enim quadamodo amplectator ad included. Hinc plerumque fled, ut unius tantum lineamenta praetendent. Si vero aqua furit ex peri semente permixtio, figuras quoque misceri, ut sobles illa communis ad neutrum refer videator, quia totum ex altero non habet. Ad utrumque, quia partum de singulus mutuata est. Nam in corporibus animalium vitamus at confundi parentum colores, e si fieri tertium nutri generantium simile. At utrisque sic exprimi, ut discoloribus membris per omne corpus concors mixtura varietor. Dispares quoque natura hoc modo fieri putantor. Cum forte in levam uteri partum masculini stirpus semen insiderat, merum quidem gigni opinatio est. Sed quia sit in fominina parti conceptus. E liquid in se habere fominium. Supra quam decus viral patiature. Vel formum insignum. Vel nimium candorum. Vel corporis levitatum. Vel artis delicatos. Vel staturam brevum. Vel vocem gracillum. Vel animum imbecillum. Vel exis plura. Item. Si partum in dextrum semen fominini sexus influxerat. Fominum quidem procreri. Sed quonium in masculina parti concepta sit. Habere in se a liquid virili datis. Ultra quam sexus. Ratio permittat. Aut valida membra. Aut immoderatam iongitudinem. Aut fuscum colorum. Aut hispidum facium. Aut vulture indecorum. Aut vocem robustum. Aut animum audacem. Aut exis plura. Si vero masculinum in dexterum. Fomininum in sinistrum pervenerit. Utrusque fetus rect provenir. Ut et fominis per omnia natura sui decus constit. Et maribus tam mente. Quam corpori rober viral sertor. I stud vero ipsum quam mirabile institutum Dei, quad ad conservation generum singulorum. Duos sexus maris ac fomine machinatus est. Quibus inter se per voluptatis illicebris copulatus, successiva sobles pariritur. Ne omne genus viventium conditia mortalitatis extinguerat. Sed plus roboris maribus attributum est, quo facilius ad patientium jugi maritalis fomine cogerantur. Vir itac nominatus est, quod major in eo vis est, quire in fomina. Et hinc virtus nomen accepit. Item mulier, ut varo interpretatur, amalati, immutata et detracta littera. Velit malie. Qui suscepto fitu. Cum partus a propinquere jam coepit. Turgescentes mame dulcibus sucis distendunter. Et ad nutrimenta nascentis fontibus lactis foecundum pectus exuberant. Nec enim decibat aliad quam ut sapiens animal accord alimonium ducerat. Idq ipsum celertissime comparatum est. Ut candens ac pinguis humor teneritudinem novi corporis irrigare. Donic ad capiendos fortiores cibos, et dentibus instrator, et viribus roboritor. Sed rediamus ad propositum, ut caetera, quae supersunt, brevitor explis mus. Poterum nunc ego ipsorum quoque genitalium membrorum mirificam rationem tibi exponere. Nisimi pudor ab hujusmodi sermon revocarit. Itaca nobis indimento vericundiae, quae sunt pudenda valentor. Quod ad hanc rem adenet, queri satis est, homines in pios ac profanos summum nefas admitter, qui divinum et admirabile Dei opus, ad propagandum successionem annexcogitabili ration provisum et effectum, vel ad turpissimos quae stus, vel ad obscoene libidinis pudenda opera convertunt, ut jam nihil aliad ex re sanctissima petent, quam ananum et sterilum voluptatem. How is it with respect to the other parts of the body? Are they without order and beauty? The flesh rounded off into the nates, how adapted to the office of sitting. and this also more firm than in the other limbs, lest by the pressure of the bulk of the body it should give way to the bones. Also the length of the thighs drawn out, and strengthened by broader muscles, in order that it might more easily sustain the weight of the body. And as this is gradually contracted, it is bounded by the knees, the comely joints of which supply a bend which is most adapted for walking and sitting. Also the legs not drawn out in an equal manner, lest an unbecoming figure should deform the feet. But they are at once strengthened and adorned by well-turned calves gently standing out and gradually diminishing. But in the soles of the feet there is the same plan as in the hands, but yet very different, for since these are, as it were, the foundations of the whole body, the admirable artificer has not made them of a round appearance, lest man should be unable to stand, or should need other feet for standing, as is the case with quadrupeds. But he has formed them of a longer and more extended shape, that they might make the body firm by their flatness, from which circumstance their name was given to them. The toes are of the same number with the fingers, for the sake of appearance rather than utility, and on this account they are both joined together, and short, and put together by gradations. And that which is the greatest of these, since it was not befitting that it should be separated from the others, as in the hand, has been so arranged in order, that it appears to differ from the others in magnitude and the small space which intervenes. This beautiful union of them strengthens the pressure of the feet with no slight aid, for we cannot be excited to running, unless, our toes being pressed against the ground, and resting upon the soil, we take an impetus and a sprain. I appear to have explained all things of which the plan is capable of being understood. I now come to those things which are either doubtful or obscure. It is evident that there are many things in the body, the force and purpose of which no one can perceive but he who made them. Can anyone suppose that he is able to relate what is the advantage, and what the effect, of that slight transparent membrane by which the stomach is netted over and covered? What the twofold resemblance of the kidneys, which Varro says are so named because streams of foul moisture arise from these, which is far from being the case, because, rising on either side of the spine, they are united, and are separated from the intestines. What is the use of the spleen? What of the liver? Organs which appear as it were to be made up of disordered blood. What of the very bitter moisture of the gall? What of the heart? Unless we shall happen to think that they ought to be believed, who think that the affection of anger is placed in the gall, that of fear in the heart, of joy in the spleen. But they will have it that the office of the liver is, by its embrace and heat, to digest the food in the stomach. Some think that the desires of the amorous passions are contained in the liver. First of all, the acuteness of the human sense is unable to perceive these things, because their offices lie concealed, nor, when laid open, do they show their uses. For, if it were so, perhaps the more gentle animals would either have no gall at all, or less than the wild beasts. The more timid ones would have more heart, the more lustful would have more liver, the more playful more spleen. As, therefore, we perceive that we hear with our ears, that we see with our eyes, that we smell with our nostrils, so assuredly we should perceive that we are angry with the gall, that we desire with the liver, that we rejoice with the spleen. Since, therefore, we do not at all perceive from what part those affections come, it is possible that they may come from another source, and that those organs may have a different effect to that which we suppose. We cannot prove, however, that they who discuss these things speak falsely. But I think that all things which relate to the motions of the mind and soul, are of so obscure and profound a nature, that it is beyond the power of man to see through them clearly. This, however, ought to be sure and undoubted, that so many objects and so many organs have one and the same office, to retain the soul in the body. But what office is particularly assigned to each, who can know, except the designer, to whom alone his own work is known? But what account can we give of the voice? Grammarians, indeed, and philosophers, define the voice to be air struck by the breath, from which words derive their name, which is plainly false. For the voice is not produced outside of the mouth, but within, and therefore that opinion is more probable, that the breath, being compressed, when it has struck against the obstacle presented by the throat, forces out the sound of the voice. As when we send down the breath into an open hemlock stalk, having applied it to the lips, and the breath, reverberating from the hollow of the stalk, and rolled back from the bottom, while it returns to that descending through meeting with itself, striving for an outlet, produces a sound, and the wind, rebounding by itself, is animated into vocal breath. Now, whether this is true, God, who is the designer, may see. For the voice appears to arise not from the mouth, but from the innermost breast. In fine, even when the mouth is closed, a sound such as is possible is emitted from the nostrils. Moreover, also, the voice is not affected by that greatest breath with which we gasp, but with a light and not compressed breath, as often as we wish. It has not therefore been comprehended in what manner it takes place, or what it is altogether. And do not imagine that I am now falling into the opinion of the Academy, for all things are not incomprehensible. For as it must be confessed that many things are unknown, since God has willed that they should exceed the understanding of man, so, however, it must be acknowledged that there are many which may both be perceived by the senses and comprehended by the reason. But we shall devote an entire treatise to the refutation of the philosophers. Let us therefore finish the course over which we are now running. That the nature of the mind is also incomprehensible, who can be ignorant, but he who is altogether destitute of mind, since it is not known in what place the mind is situated, or of what nature it is. Therefore various things have been discussed by philosophers concerning its nature and place. But I will not conceal what my own sentiments are. Not that I should affirm that it is so, for in a doubtful matter it is the part of a foolish person to do this. But that when I have set forth the difficulty of the matter, you may understand how great is the magnitude of the divine works. Some would have it, that the seat of the mind is in the breast. But if this is so, how wonderful is it, that a faculty which is situated in an obscure and dark habitation should be employed in so great a light of reason and intelligence. Then that the senses from every part of the body come together to it, so that it appears to be present in any quarter of the limbs. Others have said that its seat is in the brain and, indeed, they have used probable arguments, saying that it was doubtless befitting that that which had the government of the whole body should especially have its abode in the highest place, as though in the citadel of the body, and that nothing should be in a more elevated position than that which governs the whole by reason, just as the Lord himself, and ruler of the universe, is in the highest place. Then they say, that the organs which are the ministers of each sense, that is, of hearing, and seeing, and smelling, are situated in the head, and that the channels of all these lead not to the breast, but to the brain. Otherwise we must be more slow in the exercise of our senses, until the power of sensation by a long course should descend through the neck even to the breast. These, in truth, do not greatly err, or perchance not at all. For the mind, which exercises control over the body, appears to be placed in the highest part, the head, as God is in heaven. But when it is engaged in any reflection, it appears to pass to the breast, and, as it were, to withdraw to some secret recess, that it may elicit and draw forth counsel, as it were, from a hidden treasury. And therefore, when we are intent upon reflection, and when the mind, being occupied, has withdrawn itself to the inner depth, we are accustomed neither to hear the things which sound about us, nor to see the things which stand in our way. But whether this is the case, it is assuredly a matter of admiration how this takes place, since there is no passage from the brain to the breast. But if it is not so, nevertheless it is no less a matter of admiration that, by some divine plan or other, it is caused that it appears to be so. Can any fail to admire that that living and heavenly faculty which is called the mind or the soul, is of such volubility that it does not rest even then when it is asleep, of such rapidity, that it surveys the whole heaven at one moment of time, and, if it wills, flies over seas, traverses lands and cities, in short, places in its own sight all things which it pleases, however far and widely they are removed? And does anyone wonder if the divine mind of God, being extended through all parts of the universe, runs to and fro, and rules all things, governs all things, being everywhere present, everywhere diffused? When the strength and power of the human mind, though enclosed within a mortal body, is so great, that it can in no way be restrained even by the barriers of this heavy and slothful body, to which it is bound, from bestowing upon itself, in its impatience of rest, the power of wandering without restraint? Whether, therefore, the mind has its dwelling in the head or in the breast, can anyone comprehend what power of reason effects, that incomprehensible faculty either remains fixed in the marrow of the brain, or in that blood divided into two parts which is enclosed in the heart? And not infer from this very circumstance how great is the power of God, because the soul does not see itself, or of what nature or where it is, and if it did see, yet it would not be able to perceive in what manner an incorporeal substance is united with one which is corporeal. Or if the mind has no fixed locality, but runs here and there scattered through the whole body, which is possible, and was asserted by Xenocrates, the disciple of Plato, then, inasmuch as intelligence is present in every part of the body, It cannot be understood what that mind is, or what its qualities are, since its nature is so subtle and refined, that, though infused into solid organs by a living and, as it were, ardent perception, it is mingled with all the members. But take care that you never think it probable, as Aristoxenus said, that the mind has no existence, but that the power of perception exists from the constitution of the body and the construction of the organs, as harmony does in the case of the lyre. For musicians call the stretching and sounding of the strings to entire strains, without any striking of notes in agreement with them, harmony. They will have it, therefore, that the soul in man exists in a manner like that by which harmonious modulation exists on the lyre. Namely, that the firm uniting of the separate parts of the body and the vigor of all the limbs agreeing together, makes that perceptible motion, and adjusts the mind, as well-stretched things produce harmonious sound. And as, in the lyre, when anything has been interrupted or relaxed, the whole method of the strain is disturbed and destroyed. So in the body, when any part of the limbs receives an injury, the whole are weakened, and all being corrupted and thrown into confusion, the power of perception is destroyed, and this is called death. But he, if he had possessed any mind, would never have transferred harmony from the lyre to man. For the lyre cannot of its own accord send forth a sound, so that there can be in this any comparison and resemblance to a living person. But the soul both reflects and is moved of its own accord. But if there were in us anything resembling harmony, it would be moved by a blow from without, as the strings of the lyre are by the hands. Whereas without the handling of the artificer, and the stroke of the fingers, they lie mute and motionless. But doubtless he ought to have beaten by the hand, that he might at length observe, for his mind, badly compacted from his members, was in a state of torpor. It remains to speak of the soul, although its system and nature cannot be perceived. Nor, therefore, do we fail to understand that the soul is immortal, since whatever is vigorous and is in motion by itself at all times, and cannot be seen or touched, must be eternal. But what the soul is not yet agreed upon by philosophers, and perhaps will never be agreed upon. For some have said that it is blood, others that it is fire, others wind, from which it has received its name of anima, or animus, because in Greek the wind is called animos, and yet none of these appears to have spoken anything. For if the soul appears to be extinguished when the blood is poured forth through a wound, or is exhausted by the heat of fevers, it does not therefore follow that the system of the soul is to be placed in the material of the blood. As though a question should arise as to the nature of the light which we make use of, and the answer should be given that it is oil, for when that is consumed the light is extinguished. Since they are plainly different, but the one is the nourishment of the other. Therefore the soul appears to be like light, since it is not itself blood, but is nourished by the moisture of the blood, as light is by oil. But they who have supposed it to be fire made use of this argument, that when the soul is present the body is warm, but on its departure the body grows cold. But fire is both without perception and is seen, and burns when touched. But the soul is both endowed with perception and cannot be seen, and does not burn. From which it is evident that the soul is something like God. But they who suppose that it is wind are deceived by this, because we appear to live by drawing breath from the air. Varro gives this definition. The soul is air conceived in the mouth, warmed in the lungs, heated in the heart, diffused into the body. These things are most plainly false. For I say that the nature of things of this kind is not so obscure, that we do not even understand what cannot be true. If anyone should say to me that the heaven is of brass, or crystal, or, as Empedocles says, that it is frozen air, must I at once assent because I do not know of what material the heaven is. For as I know not this, I know that. Therefore the soul is not air conceived in the mouth, because the soul is produced much before air can be conceived in the mouth. For it is not introduced into the body after birth, as it appears to some philosophers, but immediately after conception, when the divine necessity has formed the offspring in the womb. For it so lives within the bowels of its mother, that it is increased in growth, and delights to bound with repeated beatings. In short, there must be a miscarriage if the living young within shall die. The other parts of the definition have reference to this, that during those 9 months in which we were in the womb we appear to have been dead. None, therefore, of these 3 opinions is true. We cannot, however, say that they who held these sentiments were false to such an extent that they said nothing at all. For we live at once by the blood, and heat, and breath. But since the soul exists in the body by the union of all these, they did not express what it was in its own proper sense. For as it cannot be seen, so it cannot be expressed. There follows another, and in itself an inexplicable inquiry. Whether the soul and the mind are the same, or there be one faculty by which we live, and another by which we perceive and have discernment. There are not wanting arguments on either side. For they who say that they are one faculty make use of this argument, that we cannot live without perception, nor perceive without life, and therefore that which is incapable of separation cannot be different. But that whatever it is, it has the office of living and the method of perception. On which account two Epicurean poets speak of the mind and the soul indifferently. But they who say that they are different argue in this way: that the mind is one thing, and the soul another, may be understood from this, that the mind may be extinguished while the soul is uninjured, which is accustomed to happen in the case of the insane. Also, that the soul is put to rest by death, the mind by sleep, and indeed in such a manner that it is not only ignorant of what is taking place, or where it is, but it is even deceived by the contemplation of false objects. And how this takes place cannot accurately be perceived. Why it takes place can be perceived. For we can by no means rest unless the mind is kept occupied by the similitudes of visions. But the mind lies hid, oppressed with sleep, as fire buried by ashes drawn over it. But if you stir it a little it again blazes, and, as it were, wakes up. Therefore it is called away by images, until the limbs, bedewed with sleep, are invigorated. For the body while the perception is awake, although it lies motionless, yet is not at rest, because the perception burns in it, and vibrates as a flame, and keeps all the limbs bound to itself. But when the mind is transferred from its application to the contemplation of images, then at length the whole body is resolved into rest. But the mind is transferred from dark thought, when, under the influence of darkness, it has begun to be alone with itself. While it is intent upon those things concerning which it is reflecting, sleep suddenly creeps on, and the thought itself imperceptibly turns aside to the nearest appearances. Thus it begins also to see those things which it had placed before its eyes. Then it proceeds further, and finds diversions for itself, that it may not interrupt the most healthy repose of the body. For as the mind is diverted in the day by true sights, so that it does not sleep, so is it diverted in the night by false sights, so that it is not aroused. For if it perceives no images, it will follow of necessity either that it is awake, or that it is asleep in perpetual death. Therefore the system of dreaming has been given by God for the sake of sleeping, and, indeed, it has been given to all animals in common. But this especially to man, that when God gave this system on account of rest, he left to himself the power of teaching man future events by means of the dream. For narratives often testify that there have been dreams which have had an immediate and a remarkable accomplishment, and the answers of our prophets have been after the character of a dream. On which account they are not always true, nor always false, as Virgil testified, who supposed that there were two gates for the passage of dreams. But those which are false are seen for the sake of sleeping. Those which are true are sent by God, that by this revelation we may learn impending goods or evils. A question also may arise respecting this, whether the soul is produced from the father, or rather from the mother, or indeed from both. But I think that this judgment is to be formed as though in a doubtful matter. For nothing is true of these three opinions, because souls are produced neither from both nor from either. For a body may be produced from a body, since something is contributed from both. But a soul cannot be produced from souls, because nothing can depart from a slight and incomprehensible subject. Therefore the manner of the production of souls belongs entirely to God alone. In fine, we are all sprung from a heavenly seed, all have that same Father. As Lucretius says, for nothing but what is mortal can be generated from mortals. Nor ought he to be deemed a father who in no way perceives that he has transmitted or breathed a soul from his own, nor, if he perceives it, comprehends in his mind when or in what manner that effect is produced. From this it is evident that souls are not given by parents, but by one and the same God and Father of all, who alone has the law and method of their birth, since he alone produces them. For the part of the earthly parent is nothing more than with a sense of pleasure to emit the moisture of the body, in which is the material of birth, or to receive it, and to this workman's power is limited, nor has he any further power. Therefore men wish for the birth of sons, because they do not themselves bring it about. Everything beyond this is the work of God, namely, the conception itself, and the molding of the body, and the breathing in of life, and the bringing forth in safety, and whatever afterwards contributes to the preservation of man. It is his gift that we breathe, that we live, and are vigorous. For, besides that we owe it to his bounty that we are safe in body, and that he supplies us with nourishment from various sources, he also gives to man wisdom, which no earthly father can by any means give. And therefore it often happens that foolish sons are born from wise parents, and wise sons from foolish parents, which some persons attribute to fate and the stars. But this is not now the time to discuss the subject of fate. It is sufficient to say this, that even if the stars hold together the efficacy of all things, it is nevertheless certain that all things are done by God, who both made and set in order the stars themselves. They are therefore senseless who detract this power from God, and assign it to his work. He would have it, therefore, to be in our own power, whether we use or do not use this divine and excellent gift of God. For, having granted this, he bound man himself by the mystery of virtue, by which he might be able to gain life. For great is the power, great the reason, great the mysterious purpose of man. And if anyone shall not abandon this, nor betray his fidelity and devotedness, he must be happy. He, in short, to sum up the matter in few words, must of necessity resemble God. For he is in error whosoever judges of man by his flesh. For this worthless body with which we are clothed is the receptacle of man. For man himself can neither be touched, nor looked upon, nor grasped, because he lies hidden within this body, which is seen. And if he shall be more luxurious and delicate in this life than its nature demands, if he shall despise virtue, and give himself to the pursuit of fleshly lusts, he will fall and be pressed down to the earth. But if, as his duty is, he shall readily and constantly maintain his position, which is right for him, and he has rightly obtained, if he shall not be enslaved to the earth, which he ought to trample upon and overcome, he will gain eternal life. These things I have written to you, Demetrianus, for the present in few words, and perhaps with more obscurity than was befitting, in accordance with the necessity of circumstances and the time, with which you ought to be content, since you are about to receive more and better things if God shall favor us. Then, accordingly, I will exhort you with greater clearness and truth to the learning of true philosophy. For I have determined to commit to writing as many things as I shall be able, which have reference to the condition of a happy life, and that indeed against the philosophers, since they are pernicious and weighty for the disturbing of the truth. For the force of their eloquence is incredible, and their subtlety in argument and disputation may easily deceive any one. And these we will refute partly by our own weapons, but partly by weapons borrowed from their mutual wrangling, so that it may be evident that they rather introduced error than removed it. Perhaps you may wonder that I venture to undertake so great a deed. Shall we then suffer the truth to be extinguished or crushed? I, in truth, would more willingly fail even under this burthen. For if Marcus Tullius, the unparalleled example of eloquence itself, was often vanquished by men void of learning and eloquence, who, however, were striving for that which was true, why should we despair that the truth itself will by its own peculiar force and clearness avail against deceitful and captious eloquence? They indeed are wont to profess themselves advocates of the truth, but who can defend that which he has not learned, or make clear to others that which he himself does not know? I seem to promise a great thing, but there is need of the favor of heaven, that ability and time may be given us for following our purpose. But if life is to be wished for by a wise man, assuredly I should wish to live for no other reason than that I may effect something which may be worthy of life, and which may be useful to my readers, if not for eloquence, because there is in me but a slight stream of eloquence, at any rate for living, which is especially needful. And when I have accomplished this, I shall think that I have lived enough, and that I have discharged the duty of a man, if my labor shall have freed some men from errors, and have directed them to the path which leads to heaven.
Thanks for listening to this episode of A Setting of Silver. The audio you've been listening to was produced by Bill Connick using Google's text-to-speech service. The text was taken from an 1885 collection of early church writings available at ccel.org. Finally, I want to thank the volunteers at CCEL who organized and formatted the data into a computer-friendly format. Without their work, this would have been practically impossible to create.